Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku survived eternity, but not his grief? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The air hung thick with steam and coal ash at the Daigon Aviation Dock, a sprawling, iron-laced port suspended over a network of gears, foggy moorings, and hanging chains. Steam hissed from polished copper vents. Above, airships groaned and thrummed. Massive steel hulls floated on enchanted turbines, glowing runes etched into their sides like gilded tattoos. Dockworkers shouted over the grind of turning pistons and the shriek of braking cargo lifts, while automaton loaders trundled past in jerky, inefficient movements. Shinso Hitoshi stood near one of the long-range voice telegraph booths, a private enclosure framed in brass and glass. He leaned with one arm against the panel as he spoke into the receiver, his cloak fluttering in the breeze kicked up by a departing cruiser. "Yeah, we landed 20 minutes ago. No delays." A faint, familiar sigh crackled through the receiver. "Tired, sandpaper rough, and unmistakably Aizawa Shoyuta. And where's your partner?" Shinso gave a dry look out over the platform, eyes narrowing at the scene unfolding a few yards away. Kaminari was halfway off the loading ramp of their airship, awkwardly balancing a trunk on one shoulder and a leather bag that definitely wasn't his on the other. He stumbled, cursed loudly, and kicked a crate out of his path, drawing annoyed glances from both people and mechanical dockworkers. "Taking our stuff off the ship," Shinso replied, monotone. "Or, at least trying to." Aizawa's voice sharpened with disapproval. "I'll fax you the briefing then. Make sure the idiot reads it. Twice. He has the memory akin to that of a goldfish's." Shinso allowed himself the faintest smirk. "Don't worry. I'll read it to him with pictures if I have to. But try not to cause a diplomatic incident this time." The line clicked dead. A nearby telefax machine, a squat, noisy creature of rivets and spell-etched brass, spat out a curled paper with a piercing chime. Shinso tore it free, folded it neatly, and tucked it into his worn satchel. His gloved fingers brushed over a stitched patch near the flap, old but lovingly repaired. From the corner of his eye, Kaminari finally arrived, huffing like he'd just fought a hydra. He dropped both their bags onto the grimy platform with a theatrical grunt. "The unloader ripped me off," he groused, wiping his forehead dramatically with the sleeve of his linen coat. "Nobody else was getting charged that much. I swear this is definitely because I'm a mage." He said the last part louder, as if daring any dockworker to deny it. Kaminari's coat was unbuttoned and a little too large, with a brass-studded belt slung low on his hips and shock-proof gloves hanging from one loop. A compact condenser core buzzed faintly at his back. His arc regulator, needed to keep his volatile magic stable in densely populated areas. His goggles were pushed up into his messy blonde hair, which was currently being bullied in all directions by the ocean wind. Shinso regarded him with a raised brow. "Be glad nothing was stolen." Kaminari scoffed. "Honestly, I was expecting it. I had a mental list of things to mourn." Shinso gave a quiet hum of amusement. He adjusted the strap of his bag and nodded toward the far end of the platform. "Professor Aizawa sent the mission briefing. We finish it quickly, we get to go home faster." Kaminari groaned and ran a hand through his hair, knocking his goggles askew. "Is it just me, or is the prof running us into the ground more than the other teams lately? I saw Team Monoma getting assigned to coastal cleanup. Cleanup? With snacks." Shinso shrugged, lips twitching slightly. "Probably means he holds us in high regard. Despite your blunders." Kaminari made an exaggerated gasp, then launched a soft kick at Shinso's back. The impact was more symbolic than anything. "Take it back, you emotionally constipated gargoyle." Shinso glanced over his shoulder, unimpressed, accurate and proud. The two of them stepped off the main platform, boots clinking over the iron slat bridge that led toward the inner town's shuttle station. Below them, gears churned sluggishly through layers of fog and spell-condensed vapor. The town of Lab Brava spread before them like a rust-stained clock, spiraling towers and canalways, chimneys puffing arcane smoke, glowing glyph lanterns suspended from overhead cables like hanging stars. Kaminari slung his bag over his shoulder and tilted his head toward the skyline. All right, let's go meet whatever cryptic nonsense we're getting thrown into this time. Shinso tucked the telefax briefing deeper into his satchel. Try not to electrocute anyone until I say so. Kaminari grinned. No promises. And together, they vanished into the fog and steel bones of the town. Navigating the streets of Lab Brava was like wandering through the veins of an old, restless beast. Narrow cobbled lanes twisted between soot-stained buildings and towering brass pillars that hissed with steam. Overhead, networks of copper tubing and enchantment-powered rails pulsed faintly with magelight, their glow muted by the ever-present smog. Mechanical trams screeched in the distance, while the occasional clink of automaton limbs echoed from alleyways. It was a town that once gleamed long ago, maybe, but now bore the stains of disuse and tension. Shinso stood quietly beside a cracked lamppost as Kaminari attempted, for the fourth time, to ask a passerby for directions. "Excuse me," Kaminari said, holding up a polite hand. "We're looking for the mayor's house?" "Mayor Danjuro Tobito." The middle-aged man glanced at them, at Kaminari's mage insignia pinned to his coat, at the visible arc regulator humming faintly at his back, and promptly turned around and walked the other way. Kaminari sighed, defeated. "That's the third one." "Fourth," Shinso corrected, deadpan. "I asked the third one twice." "Counts as two," Kaminari muttered. They pressed on, stepping past flickering glyph posts and boarded-up shopfronts. A street vendor selling curse words under his breath spat toward Kaminari's feet as they passed. Another young boy threw a handful of dust in their direction, muttering something about murderers. Shinsu's gaze swept over the crowd with casual indifference. It wasn't his first cold reception. Kaminari, on the other hand, looked increasingly like he wanted to throw a live wire into the nearest alley. "Okay, seriously, I thought the Academy's emblem was at least supposed to earn us basic rights, not get us treated like walking plagues." "Maybe they've heard you talk," Shinso offered, eyes scanning the signage. "Ahead." Kaminari grumbled something unintelligible and shoved his hands in his coat pockets. After two wrong turns, one overly long detour that ended at a closed textile mill, and a half-accurate set of directions from a man missing 3 teeth and most of his sense of direction, they finally reached their destination. The mayor's estate loomed behind wrought iron gates carved with cresting river motifs. The building was tall and lean, clad in brownstone with dark copper filigrees spiraling around its corners. A pair of mechanical gargoyles blinked above the door, sentient, perhaps though they made no move to intervene. They pushed the gate open with a low metallic groan. Inside, the air changed. Quieter. Older. A lingering scent of parchment, oil, and enchanted lacquer clung to the foyer. They were greeted by a stern-looking woman in a pressed charcoal-gray uniform, her silver hair twisted into a bun sharp enough to be used as a weapon. Her gaze swept over them with the precision of a judge. Kaminari straightened up instinctively. "Follow me," she said briskly, without asking their names. They walked across a long hallway lined with strange, antique paintings, some abstract, others far too lifelike. One featured a weeping woman with rivets bolted into her face. Another was a crooked city skyline swallowing its own reflection. Kaminari leaned closer to one as they passed. "Okay, are these cursed or just bad taste?" he whispered. Shinso didn't answer, though his eyes lingered a second longer on a particularly dark canvas, a black river winding through a mountain of eyes. The stern woman stopped before a heavy door with gilded handles and knocked twice. A muffled "enter" came from within. She opened the door for them and stepped aside. The office was awash in warm lamplight. Copper tubing curled up along the walls, interlaced with mossy enchantment lines pulsing gently like veins. Shelves brimming with scrolls and gears towered behind a large wooden desk where a lean man in monocles shuffled through a mound of paperwork. He looked up, and the sharp focus in his eyes softened when they landed on them. "Ah, yes, come in, come in. Please, take a seat." Shinso and Kaminari exchanged glances before stepping forward. The furniture was surprisingly plush velvet upholstery with delicate stitchwork. Kaminari's fingers twitched to poke the buttons along the cushions but resisted. Barely. The man set aside a file, folded his hands, and inclined his head politely. My name is Danjuro Tobito, mayor of this town. I was the one who placed the request with UA. Shinso nodded once. We received your report. You asked for a mana inspection of the river on the outskirts. Danjuro's expression turned grim as he leaned back slightly. Is the gentle river. It's a popular spot, or was. Locals, travelers, even caravans from the Midland districts came for its scenery. The water was known for its clarity and supposed minor healing properties. But, he paused as if embarrassed, about a week ago, strange events began. The water turns red. Not always, but periodically. And then the sounds began. Kaminari tilted his head. Sounds. Just drowning noises. Splashing. Screaming even. But no bodies. No currents. Just empty water and noise. He opened a drawer and handed over a parchment with several reports, handwritten notes, diagrams, and scrawled testimonials from frightened villagers. Tourism plummeted overnight. That river sustains a third of our town's economy. People think it's cursed now. I had to call professionals. Shinso scanned the notes silently, then looked up. We'll investigate. If it's a curse or anomaly, we'll confirm it and relay the results to the academy. Kaminari raised an eyebrow. Or it could be crocodiles. Having a very dramatic feast. Shinso almost chuckled. Danjuro did not. He merely sighed and gestured toward a tray of tea and lightly buttered rolls. You're welcome to rest before you head out. I understand this town hasn't been particularly kind to your kind. Kaminari scoffed. Yeah, well, I've had warmer welcomes from electrified fences. Danjuro didn't laugh, but his mouth twitched. They'll come around. Eventually. Fear makes fools of decent people. Shinso stood, tucking the notes into his coat. We'll head out now. The sooner we finish, the sooner we're out of their way. The mayor nodded slowly. Good luck, sorcerers. As they walked out of the room, Kaminari muttered, Crocs. Definitely Crocs. Shinso rolled his eyes. Let's hope you're right. The door clicked shut behind them as they descended the hall once more, leaving behind strange paintings, quiet politeness, and an unnerving feeling that something unseen had just started watching. The gentle river gleamed under the late afternoon sun, deceptively serene. Its surface glimmered with the reflection of copper clouds, soft ripples disturbing the otherwise mirror-like clarity. Birds wheeled overhead, calling lazily. Trees rustled along the banks in a breeze that smelled of moss, silt, and something else, something sour and faintly metallic. Shinso knelt on the rickety wooden boat they'd borrowed from the dock. His gloved hands gripped a thick, braided rope, anchoring it through a hook on the bow. He gave it one final tug and looked down at his partner, who stood barefoot at the edge of the boat in a ridiculously bright red swimsuit and a pair of brass filter goggles. Once more, Shinso said, voice flat. You feel anything tug, anything pull the rope. I know, Kaminari grumbled, stretching his arms dramatically. You've said that like 10 times now. 9. Still too many. I'm not a moron. Shinso quirked an eyebrow. Statistically, the data suggests otherwise. Kaminari huffed. Love you too. And with that he launched himself overboard with a loud splash. Shinso sat back, resting his boot on the coil of rope while keeping the line taut between his gloved fingers. The boat rocked gently beneath him. He squinted out over the river, now calm again. The silence stretched. Above them, the sky was painted amber with the last touches of light. The buzz of cicadas rose from the reeds. A heron stood statue still in the distance. For a moment, it was easy to forget the town was terrified of this place. Then the rope jerked so violently it almost tore from Shinsu's hands. Sheet. He yanked hard, digging in his heels. A wet slap followed as Kaminari burst out of the water, gasping and flailing, tangled in the rope like a panicked eel. Up. Up, get me up. Shinso pulled, hauling him onto the deck. With a thud and a splatter of river water. Kaminari lay on his back, wheezing, his chest heaving like a bellows. His goggles were askew, revealing wide, glassy eyes. Shinso leaned over him. What the hell happened? Before Kaminari could respond, the water behind the boat bled red. A line of crimson bloomed across the surface, thick, unnatural, like paint poured over glass. Bubbles surged up. A deep gurgling sound echoed under the surface. Kaminari sat up like a corpse reanimating. Tentacles. Shinso blinked. What? Man-eating corals. With teeth, Kaminari staggered to his feet, lifted both hands, and screamed, "I'm gonna zap the demon thing." Before Shinso could stop him, Kaminari's arc regulator flared, and bolts of electricity ripped from his fingers straight into the river. The air crackled. Steam hissed. The water roared like something alive had just been tossed into a seizure. A flock of birds exploded from the trees. The heron bolted. Silence. Dead fish bobbed to the surface. A few floated belly up, still twitching from residual shocks. Kaminari dropped to his knees, chest heaving. Yeah, I panicked. No kidding, Shinso muttered, cautiously scanning the river. I saw something, man. Kaminari pulled off his goggles and wiped his face. The guy. In the water. He was drowning, and then these coral things? They wrapped around him. Crushed him. Ate him. Okay. And then he came back. He regenerated. Right in front of me. Then it happened again. Coral strangled. Blood. Chomp chomp. Then back to whole again. Shinso stared at him. And then, he asked slowly. And then, Kaminari gasped. The guy looked at me. Looked straight at me. That's when I pulled the rope. There was a pause. Then Shinso sat back, rubbing his jaw. So what you're telling me is, you saw a regenerating corpse get eaten by cursed coral in an infinite loop. Kaminari nodded furiously. Yes. And he was alive the whole time. Another nod. Yup. Shinso sighed, face-palming. You attract the worst missions. Before Kaminari could respond, the river's surface shifted again. Something rose slowly, unnervingly until a body broke the surface. Floating face up. Naked. Unmoving. But whole. Kaminari stared, slack-jawed. It's him. That's the guy. He looks less eaten now, but I swear that's him. Shinso stared for a second, then gave him a flat look. Oh my god, Kaminari, you just electrocuted him. Did I kill him? Kaminari yelped, stumbling back. Am I going to be arrested? Is that murder? Or what's the legal term for that? Shinso sighed and slapped the back of Kaminari's head. We'll figure it out. What are we supposed to do? Dump the body? Say we found it that way? Bury him. Kaminari blinked. What? Shinso stood up, picking up the boat pole. We bury him. Quietly. No one will know. That's your plan? Unless you'd prefer a formal inquiry where you explain the coral-eating corpse loop to the Academy Board. Kaminari clutched his head. Shinso, I'm too young for a life sentence. Then row, Shinso said, already moving toward the drifting figure. Kaminari ummed in existential dread but obeyed. As they paddled toward the body, dead fish drifted past them like tiny floating witnesses. This is how horror stories start, Kaminari muttered. Two dumbass mages find a corpse and decide to touch it. Technically, you zapped it first, Shinso offered. Oh gods, that's worse. They reached the body. It was a man. Freckles on his cheeks. Dark curls plastered to his face. Kaminari's mouth twitched. He's kinda cute for a corpse. Don't be weird. Kaminari groaned and reached for the body's wrist. It was warm. But the skin didn't feel like that of the dead. Dude, he said in a whisper. I think he's breathing. Then suddenly, with the awkward certainty of comedy and horror meeting in a head-on collision, the corpse sat up. Kaminari screamed. The man blinked blearily, coughed, looked around and then stood up, wobbling. Naked, soaking wet, utterly unfazed. Is he? Shinso began. The man, face blank, turned and began walking back into the river. Kaminari's panic turned to sheer confusion. Wait, where is he? He's trying to drown himself again? Shinso said, incredulous. Kaminari stood up, flailing. Hey, corpse guy, no. The man shouted something sharp, guttural, incomprehensible. An old tongue. Language. Neither of them understood a word. But the tone? Purely furious. Shinso moved fast. Screw it, sleep. His magic flared. Purple light flashed in his eyes. The man froze mid-step, eyes wide, then collapsed into the river with a splash. Kaminari yelped again and leapt forward, hauling the man out. He was heavier than he looked. As they rolled him back onto the muddy shore, Shinso flopped beside him, groaning. "You electrocuted a cursed immortal," Shinso muttered. "And you mind-controlled a suicidal naked man," Kaminari replied. They stared at the sky, wet, filthy, and exhausted. "This report's gonna SEK," Shinso groaned, dragging both hands down his face. Kaminari laughed loud and breathless. "Worse ever." They lay there, river gently lapping at their boots, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the supposed suicidal naked man beside them twitched softly in his sleep. The interrogation wing of the Yuta Mage Academy was quiet, too quiet. The heavy vaulted ceiling loomed like a judgmental archangel, all black stone and reinforced maniseal etchings. Twin mechanical fans spun slowly overhead, clicking rhythmically like a metronome counting down to the next bureaucratic disaster. A trio of warm glow lamps lined the walls, giving the otherwise dungeonesque room a moody, old library ambience. Scrolls and binders of cursed object logs were neatly stacked in the shelves behind the main desk. At the far end of the room, a security automaton paced back and forth on clinking treads, pausing every few seconds to blink its glowing eyes at the situation in front of it. Dezawa Shoyuta stood at the center of the room, arms folded, hair tied back, dressed in a long, high-collared coat made of dark wool and matte leather, stitched with binding runes and dusted faintly at the hem with a patina. His scarf, a signature enchanted restraint cloth known as binding thread, was loosely looped around his neck like a sleepy serpent. His expression was the same as always, unreadable, tired, and faintly judgmental. Standing across from him were Shinso and Kaminari, both in the standard mage fieldwear uniform, a charcoal gray jacket reinforced with alchemical lining, arcane sigils faintly embossed at the seams. Kaminari wore his coat open, collar popped, arc regulators strapped to his back with messy wires poking out of its fuses. Shinso, in contrast, wore his properly buttoned, gloves tucked into the sash at his waist, boots polished to near professionalism. Both looked like they hadn't slept in days. The door beside them stood ajar, showing a brief glimpse of Izuku Midoriya, sitting on the floor of the isolation cell. He was still barefoot, wrapped in a modest academy-issued robe that was too big on him, green curls disheveled, a picture of true chaos. He was gagged. He was also glaring like he was 5 seconds from vaporizing everyone in the room via sheer spite. Aizawa's eye twitched. He looked at Shinso, who stood like a picture of composure. "Why," Aizawa said slowly, "is this man gagged and handcuffed?" Before Shinso could answer, Kaminari stepped in, visibly wilted, eyes hollow. "Because he keeps trying to kill himself, sir," he said, holding up a hand like he was pleading for sanity. "Every time we unbound him, he'd either dive for the river again or try to walk headfirst into a manalock furnace. I swear I caught him trying to hang himself from the ceiling at one point." The gagged man growled audibly through his mouth tape. Dezawa blinked once, twice. Then he turned back to Shinso. "Start from the top." Shinso sighed. "He's the anomaly. The one behind the Bloodwater Loop at Gentle River. The river was not cursed. We scanned it," he looked in Izuku's direction, "and him too. 0 mana. No outward sorcery, no magical equipment. But, seems like a case of a cursed individual." He gestured toward the man. "He doesn't die. He regenerates. Over and over. We pulled him out after he'd been impaled by coral. Kaminari electrocuted the whole river. Didn't matter. He just floated up and woke up like it had no effect." Kaminari lifted a finger. "Yeah, I saw it with my own 2 eyes. Like I thought I killed him. You ever see a corpse look you in the eye like it wants you to feel bad? Because I have now." The bound man gave an exasperated groan behind the tape and yanked his cuffed hands up slightly in protest. Aizawa stared at him for a moment longer. Then, "Ungag him." Shinso gave a slow blink. Sir, respectfully. Do it. Shinso walked forward and peeled the black tape off the man's mouth in one clean motion. The man immediately screamed. It wasn't just loud. It was furious. A tangled string of syllables in a language none of them understood, fluid, rhythmic, yet biting like broken glass dragged across concrete. Tvalen Iagari. Nakatre Hessel. Trail. Spittle flew. His voice cracked with rage and indignation. He thrashed in his cuffs, rattling the iron rings against the floor. Aizawa remained perfectly still. His brow rose a millimeter. Kaminari, however, had pressed himself against the nearest bookshelf like a man expecting projectiles. Shinso watched the man with furrowed brows. It seems that we don't speak the same tongue. I looked it up and it turns out that it belongs to the pre-collapse era. Kaminari whispered. I'm pretty sure that he called me a slur though. The man continued, alternating between threats and some version of creative profanity. Shinso was fairly sure one of the words had an accent on every vowel. Aizawa turned back toward his two subordinates. Which means, possibly the curse of immortality. Is all I can make sense off of, Shinso confirmed. Considering the nature of his curse, he may possibly be from the pre-collapse era. There's no record of him in the National Registry either. I've asked Melissa to confirm other national registries as well, at least request to view them at least. He's got no magical signature nor an ID ink. And no explanation for how he's still alive if he is from that era, Aizawa murmured. Kaminari piped up. Should we sedate him? He looks one glare away from combusting, sir. At that moment, the man twisted toward him, and if glares could kill, Kaminari would have been vaporized on the spot. The man spat a final word, sharp and deliberate. Vre. Kaminari looked at Shinso. That one was definitely a slur. Shinso gave an amused chuckle and confirmed, yeah, that one was. Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose, turned his head slightly toward the ceiling, and inhaled deeply as if praying for patience or divine intervention. Put him in medical containment. Isolation ward. Don't let him near anything sharp, magical, or emotionally manipulative. Copy that, Shinso replied. Kaminari raised a hand. Can we also request, like, a translator? Or a linguist with a death wish? The bound man said something else. Kaminari winced. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely being insulted now. Shinso dragged the man to his feet. The moment he stood, his posture changed, no longer slouched, but rigid with residual fury and long, practiced restraint. His glare could have burned stars. Aizawa sighed again, slower this time. Welcome to your next assignment. Get him accustomed to everything in a year, he muttered. As Aizawa exited, Izuku let out another perfectly pronounced, perfectly furious word in his ancient tongue. Kaminari looked back at him with a grin. Still no idea what you're saying, man. But keep it coming. Izuku's glare promised war. Shinso clapped his partner on the back. You've got a talent for making enemies. Proud of you. They closed the door with a final, exhausted sigh. Behind it, muffled curses in a dead language echoed like ancient poetry through steel and stone. The soft hum of runes buzzed through the warm-lit chamber of Melissa Shield's research office, a cluttered sanctum of invention nestled within one of the upper wings of UA's Mage Sciences division. The place looked like a storm had swept through a library, a forge, and a translation bureau all at once. Scrolls were stacked dangerously high beside antique books. Half-disassembled automatons lay on open tables, metal limbs twitching now and then with lingering enchantment sparks. Blueprints were spread across an entire wall like tapestry, annotated with quick-scribbled equations and magical theory diagrams. A globular arcane crystal floated beside Melissa's desk, glowing faintly in rhythm with her breath. At the center of the storm sat Melissa Shield, her posture slumped, one elbow on her desk as she scrolled through dense, rune-heavy pages. Her hair was a mess of loose blonde strands and pinned braids, and at some point in the last hour she'd pulled her goggles up onto her forehead, forgetting to remove them entirely. Her free hand absently threaded through her bangs again and again, a silent gesture of fatigue. A glass of cold tea sat forgotten at her elbow. An automaton in the corner, a spherical bot mounted with mechanical arms and a built-in translator core, twitched slightly every time she muttered under her breath. Her muttering stopped when the door creaked open. Kaminari stumbled in like he owned the place, balancing a paper bag in one arm and a crooked grin on his face. "Doi," he called, waving the bag. "Today's special, cookies and unsolicited friendship." Melissa didn't even lift her head. "Is it unsolicited if I was silently praying for sugar?" Kaminari plopped down into the empty chair beside her, wiggling the bag at her. "I bring peace offerings because someone has been working themselves into a coma trying to decode ancient syntax and stabilize short-range transference nodes." "I'm not stabilizing anything, Kaminari," Melissa groaned. "I'm correcting and retranslating it. The last translation you sent had 4 grammatical fallacies and a dialect inversion loop. I think the automata were trying to conjugate verbs in past-future subjunctive, which doesn't exist." She reached over without looking, flipped a few switches on the floating orb, and with a twitch of her fingers, fine-tuned a sigil glyph on its side. The automata let out a pleased chime and retracted its arms neatly into its core with a hiss of compressed air. Kaminari blinked. "Did you just fix that without looking? I'd have to be blind to mess up that interface." Melissa finally leaned back in her chair, arms raised over her head in a stretch, the motion making her crack her neck. "Besides, that thing's been hiccuping death threats in ancient lingo all morning. I'm just making sure it doesn't accidentally insult our Mr. Cursed Immortal." Kaminari winced, placing the cookies on the desk like an offering to a sleep-deprived goddess. "Yeah, about that. How's it going with our resident river gremlin?" Melissa gave him a tired, pouty look that belonged more in a child demanding ice cream than the Academy's top rune linguist technician. "I was already juggling mana-imbued artifact blueprints from 6 different countries," she groaned. "Then Shinso drops the bomb of checking almost every country's national records, God, and to top it off with sending me a 20-page request for historical cross-references from the pre-collapse era. And now I'm also apparently the designated decoder for a guy who speaks like an extinct manuscript and looks like he crawled out of an underwater tomb." Kaminari gave her his most apologetic grin, scratching the back of his head. "I'll make it up to you. I swear. Cookies, first step." Melissa sighed, poked the bag with one finger, then gave him a sideways look. "You're lucky I like almond." He chuckled, but the mood shifted as Melissa reached over to grab a slim folder from her desk. Her posture straightened, her expression slipping into professional gear. "I assume you're here for the transcript," she said, handing it to him. Kaminari took the file and flipped it open, eyes flicking over the first few pages. Neatly transcribed lines showed only fragments of a conversation, pauses, notes on inflection, and Melissa's annotations. "Only gave his name?" he asked, brow lifting. "Izuku?" Melissa nodded. "And that he's cursed with immortality. That's about it." She rested her chin on her hand. "He's not a talker. I managed to calm him down after I explained the situation. No one's trying to hurt him. He's not a prisoner, we just need to understand him. But he didn't share much." "Sounds about right," Kaminari muttered, flipping another page. "Can't blame him though, he got nearly zapped into a fish fry the day we found him." "On the other hand," Melissa added, "he asked a lot about the current era. Technology, geography, political boundaries. He's absorbing a lot, even if he's not giving much back." Kaminari closed the folder with a soft thump and leaned back with a long sigh. "Well, here's to hoping he starts warming up." "He's a bit," he paused, searching for a polite word. "Stabby." Melissa offered helpfully. Kaminari grinned. "Yeah, that." A knock sounded from the doorframe. Shinso stood there, arms crossed, expression as flat as ever. "It's time." Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Well, that was ominous." "Everything sounds ominous when he says it," Kaminari replied, already rising from his seat. He grabbed the cookie bag and tossed it onto her lap. "More bribery later. Try not to dissolve into a caffeine-deprived puddle." "I'll survive," Melissa said, waving a hand as she reached for another translation scroll. "Barely." As the two mages exited the room, the door clicking shut behind them, followed by the automaton which resumed its quiet hum now. Finally, saying nothing blasphemous at all. The room was quiet. Not the comforting, restful sort of quiet, but the static kind. The kind that made the corners feel too sharp, the shadows too still. A constant low hum from the wall-embedded rune lights filled the air like ghost breath, pale and sterile. The floors were polished stone, faintly cold even through the thin mat beneath him. Izuku lay on his side, facing the wall, an arm tucked under his cheek, curls half damp from the recent wash they'd insisted on. His gaze didn't move, but his mind did. Silently. Constantly. Exhaustingly. There wasn't much to do in the room. No books. No furniture aside from the mat, a minimal shelf in the wall, and a pitcher of water with a single silver cup. No windows. But he observed. Oh, he always observed. The stern-eyed man with the white scarf, he had power. The others moved around him like gravity. When he spoke, they obeyed. Even when he sighed, they listened. It seemed as if the authority was not through force but through weight. Aizawa, Melissa had called him during their conversation. And talking about Melissa, she had introduced herself clearly. She had spoken with her hands a lot. She seemed intelligent and easy to talk to. At least that was what he gauged from their conversation. She had provided him with basic information regarding his situation and the surrounding world as well. Then there were those two. The loud blonde, hair messy like sunfire, eyes too open, voice always bright even when he looked tired. A flickering sort of presence, electric, raw, worn. He covered everything with noise. And the quiet violet one, sharp eyes like polished glass, always watching, always processing. That one didn't fidget. Didn't pretend. He reminded Izuku of someone. Maybe a soldier. Maybe a tactician. He didn't know what any of them truly were yet, but he had theories. A creak broke his thoughts. The door opened. Izuku sat up slowly, silent, as the two men entered, Shinso and Kaminari, followed by a strange, orb-like contraption hovering just above the floor. It buzzed faintly, its mechanical limbs tucked neatly inside a brass and crystal casing. He squinted at it. Looked unnatural. Was it alive? A spirit? A familiar? Yo, Kaminari said cheerfully, raising a hand. The automata pulsed blue. Hello. Izuku's brow lifted slightly. That had come out in his language. He looked at the orb. Then at Kaminari but chose to not answer. At that, Kaminari's grin flickered just slightly, then solidified. Heh. Okay, tough crowd. He sat down cross-legged a few feet away from Izuku, clearly trying to make the conversation feel less like an interrogation. Izuku's gaze drifted briefly to the door still open and then returned to the floating translator. Shinso stayed standing. Melissa must have explained the situation to you, the purple head began. The automata repeated the phrase in fluent pre-collapse dialect. Izuku blinked once. Slight surprise flickered across his face before he nodded. She told me quite a bit, he replied slowly. His voice was quiet, unused, like a blade pulled from deep rust. Still formal. Shinso inclined his head slightly. Then I assume you understand where you are? Izuku nodded again. Mage Academy. You. Kaminari exhaled quietly, almost with relief. Progress. Izuku glanced at him. His gaze was calculating. Curious. Measuring. Then his attention shifted back to Shinso. You pulled me from the river, Izuku said. You and him. Yes, Shinso confirmed. And since then, our supervisor, Mr. Aizawa, has placed you under our observation. We weren't sure if you were a threat. Izuku went quiet for a beat. But then, what are you planning to do with me? Kaminari hesitated. Shinso was about to speak until Kaminari cut in, blurting, well, the first step was helping you understand the language. After that, basic courses, and then you'd be enrolled into the academy officially. What if I don't want that? Izuku interrupted, voice calm. Measured. Testing. Kaminari faltered. Shinso stepped in, voice even but firmer now. It's not an option. Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly at that as if challenging the latter to explain himself. Shinso continued, the world we've got now isn't one where people like you and me get to choose. He didn't need to name the others. Witches. Demons. Hybrids. Remnants. The academy exists to protect us. But in return, we lose the right to leave. That finally drew a true reaction. Izuku frowned, gaze dropping to the floor. He hadn't realized. He had assumed containment, interrogation, maybe slow torture. But not this. A golden cage was still a cage. He lay back down, turning his body away, eyes on the blank wall. Shinso watched him. "We're your instructors until you're officially cleared," he added. "He's Kaminari. I'm Shinso." Izuku didn't respond. The silence stretched again, this time thicker, closed. Kaminari rubbed the back of his neck. "Oh, that went better than expected." Shinso didn't reply immediately. His eyes remained on the still figure lying on the mat, curled slightly into himself, like someone waiting for the world to be quiet again. No threat. No answers. Finally, Shinso turned. "Come on. I think that's about it for today." The two of them left without another word. The door hissed closed behind them, and Izuku remained motionless, silent, and very much awake. The corridors of U.Mage Academy were far from ordinary. They hummed with the low frequency of bound wards, arcane lanterns, and magically stabilized stone. Gears clicked softly behind walls lined with luminescent veins of containment sigils. Pipes hissed as steam-powered ventilation mixed with filtration spells, pushing clean air through layers of cold stone. Students, mages, researchers, cursed individuals in training moved between levels, robes fluttering, some with familiars at their heels or Manitoon devices strapped to their belts. Kaminari trudged forward, arms crossed behind his head, mouth drawn in a tired line. His boots scuffed slightly against the tiled floor as he exhaled. "He didn't even blink," he muttered. Beside him, Shinso nodded once. Not much of a talker, but not hostile either. "That's worse, man," Kaminari huffed. "At least when someone's mad, you know where you stand. This guy just stares at walls like they insulted his ancestors." He's processing. Probably still figuring out if we're captors or keepers. Great. Love being emotionally profiled by a cursed immortal. They turned the corner. And that's when they heard it. A laugh. Not a soft chuckle or a laugh of surprise, but a full-bodied, teeth-baring, maniacal cackle that bounced off the rune-lined walls like a theatrical explosion. Kaminari froze mid-step. Shinso visibly sighed. "Oh no," Kaminari groaned. "Not again." Emerging from a side hall like a peacock in human form was Monoma Nito. His hair was immaculately styled, his eyes gleaming with smug superiority, and his smile so wide it might as well have been a provocation. "Fancy meeting you too," Monoma exclaimed, arms spread as if expecting applause. "I heard you're stuck babysitting a cursed for the next year." He clapped his hands once. "Congratulations on adopting a walking tantrum." Kaminari's face contorted into the kind of grin people wore when they were trying not to throw furniture. He leaned toward Shinso and whispered through gritted teeth, "Can I deck this guy? Just once. Real hard. No magic. Just fists." "I'd let you," Shinso muttered back. "But Aizawa would have our heads." Tempting trade. While they whispered, Monoma continued, arms behind his back as he paced beside them. "I, on the other hand, just received another top-tier assignment. One of high risk, of course. They wouldn't send someone unqualified." "Of course not," Shinso said blandly. Kaminari groaned. No, don't encourage him." But it was too late. Monoma's eyes gleamed with dramatic glee. "You want to know what it is, don't you? You must be curious." "Nope," Kaminari said immediately, pivoting and walking away. "Not even a little. Zero curiosity. Not even an iota, and that's imaginary." Monoma waved him off like a buzzing fly. "Anyway, Shinso, I've been tasked with tracking and capturing a demon." That made Shinso pause. He turned his head slightly. "Demon? That's rare." "Oh, not just rare," Monoma said, puffing out his chest. "Exceedingly rare, sentient. This one was seen in a port town on the western frontier, near the coast." He leaned in closer, voice low and dramatic. "They say it had humanoid features. Pink skin. And the eyes golden." Shinso narrowed his eyes. "Sentient really?" That's what they suspect, Monoma said with a nod. Shinso frowned thoughtfully. I didn't think sentient demons existed. Well, Monoma smirked. That's why I'm going. To find out. Investigate. Study. And if necessary, subdue. I assume by subdue, you mean chase it around with 3 backup teams and beg it to stand still? Shinso said dryly. Monoma huffed. Mock me all you want, but when I bring back a living sentient demon, I'll be the one writing history. I'd rather not be history, Kaminari called from down the hall. Shinso turned to leave before Monoma could climb further up his high horse. Well, good luck, he said, already walking. Try not to scare it into another continent. Monoma scoffed after him. I don't scare. I intimidate. There's a difference. Shinso didn't respond. Just raised one lazy hand in half-wave and rounded the corner. Behind him, Monoma called out, You'll see. When I return a hero, you'll all. The hallway swallowed the rest of his rant. Kaminari was waiting around the corner, leaning against the wall and groaning, We are so going to have to clean up his mess, aren't we? Shinso didn't answer. But the look in his eyes said, Eventually. The city of Leadenport was a sprawling maze of slate rooftops and gleaming brass towers that shimmered in the salt-heavy air. Fog clung to the base of buildings, and the rhythmic ka-chunk of dock cranes echoed in the background as ships lined the harbor, some with sails, others floating mid-air, buoyed by mana cores and arcane turbines. It was a city of movement, where steam hissed through vents like sighs and mechanical carriages clattered down cobbled roads. Glass-paneled shops displayed enchanted trinkets, glowing charms, and rare alchemical brews. Despite the bustle, eyes always drifted toward the unfamiliar. Mina pulled her hood lower. Her cloak was thick, the hood drawn far enough to shade her face, but not so far that she couldn't see. Still, the stares it earned were unmistakable. Some were curious, others cautious. Even here, in a city of transients and travelers, pink skin and glowing eyes attracted attention, and the bad kind. She hated the way their eyes lingered. Did we really have to stay here? She whispered, voice low but tight as she walked beside Kirishima, her hand brushing his coat sleeve with every cautious step. We could have stayed in one of the trader lodges or even slept in the cargo yard. Kirishima reached over and gently patted the top of her hood. Hey, he said softly, voice warm. We'll only be here for 2 days. I just need to resupply maps, route markers, maybe a rune or 2. You know the drill. Mina kept her gaze down as they entered the hotel, an older building with dark wood paneling and golden rune carvings etched into the pillars. The bell above the door gave a soft chime that echoed through the stone lobby. The staff at the counter looked up, and then paused. The woman behind the desk, mid-50s, dark hair streaked with silver and pinned in tight coils, gave Mina a look that was just a bit too long. Not hostile, just measured. Mina shifted subtly behind Kirishima. He stepped forward, placing a small pouch of coins on the desk. Room for 2, please. Just a couple of nights. We're passing through. The receptionist accepted the pouch and nodded without a word, her eyes flicking back to Mina once more before reaching under the desk for a brass keycard. Mina leaned toward Kirishima, whispering under her breath, You sure we can't do this in 1 day? Kirishima took the key with a charming smile and glanced at her, his red eyes glinting with mischief. Not unless you want dinner to be canned beans and burnt trail bread. Mina groaned. I'd take the beans if it meant less staring. He leaned in closer, voice softer now. They'll get bored. Besides, we're together. I'm not gonna let anyone do more than look, got it? Her eyes peeked out from under her hood, golden and glowing, catching just a flicker of warmth in his. Fine, she muttered. But just as she turned to walk past him toward the hallway, he scooped her up. With zero warning, Kirishima hoisted her over his shoulder like a sack of cabbages. Aijiru! Mina shrieked, her legs kicking wildly, her hood slipping halfway off as she flailed. You absolute pig! Put me down! He laughed a deep, genuine belly laugh and started jogging toward the stairs, arms steady around her waist while she pounded his back with her fists. The staff at the counter blinked, and then chuckled. Sheesh, one of them muttered with a small smile. Young love, huh? Sweet couple, another added, shaking her head fondly as they disappeared up the staircase in a whirlwind of pink limbs, red hair, and uncontainable chaos. Mina, red-faced and still yelling, managed a furious, "I swear, when we get to that room, you're sleeping on the floor." "Joke's on you," Kirishima called back, not missing a beat. "I packed the sleeping bag." Their voices echoed up the stairwell, then faded as the door clicked shut behind them on the second floor. And for a moment, the lobby was quiet again. But somewhere, beneath the laughter and fluster, Mina's fingers tightened just a little around the back of Kirishima's coat. Grateful. Because being stared at with suspicion and disdain was one thing. But being seen by the right person? That made all the difference. The air in Aizawa's office was heavy with old documents, ink, and something faintly acrid like burnt tea leaves. The single rune lamp suspended above his desk glowed a muted amber, casting deep shadows across the shelves of organized documents and glowing mana capsules that lined the stone walls. A faint whir from a ventilation charm kept the silence from becoming stifling. Shinso stood near the desk, spine straight, hands loosely tucked into the sides of his uniform coat. He glanced at the paper stacks cluttering Aizawa's workspace, sealed missives, magical contracts, medical forms, and reports stamped with the Yuta Mage Academy's cobalt crest. Across the desk, Aizawa sat in his usual posture, shoulders slightly hunched, one elbow propped against a report, the other hand rubbing slowly at the back of his neck. His coat had been draped over the nearby chair, and his dark uniform sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing the faint shimmer of barrier runes inked along his forearms. He didn't look up when he spoke. "How far along are you with him?" Shinso blinked once, then deduced that he was asking about the greenet. He cleared his throat and after a pause said, "Well enough, it's been about 3 months now. He's settled in. No suicide or escape attempts so far. He's quiet. Cooperative, technically." Aizawa finally glanced up, one brow raising in skeptical silence. Shinso added quickly, "He's also fluent now. Or close enough. Melissa finished programming the automata last month. He picked up most of the common dialect after that." Aizawa hummed, expression unreadable, and returned his gaze to the documents in front of him. The room fell quiet again until Aizawa picked up another report, eyes scanning the cover page. A sigh slipped from him. Not annoyed. Just done. Shinsu's gaze slid to the page as Aizawa flipped it open. He caught the seal on the top corner, filed by Nito Monoma. Field Ops Team 4. So that was why Aizawa sighed like he'd aged 10 years. Did something go wrong? Shinso asked, stepping forward slightly. Aizawa didn't answer at first. He just stared blankly at the page, then slowly lifted his eyes to meet Shinsu's. They were deadpan. Even more than usual. Like the kind of look a man gave when trying to decide if he should read the next paragraph or just set the entire desk on fire. They were no match for the demon, Aizawa said dryly. All 6 sustained severe burns. 2 have fractured bones, one of which is Monoma himself. And he has filed 3 reimbursement requests for potions, support gear repairs, and somehow a new pair of enchanted boots. Shinso raised one eyebrow. Should I even ask? Aizawa passed him the file silently. Shinso opened it and began reading the entries inside. The first report, dated a month and a half prior, was written in Kendo's crisp, even handwriting. Arrived in Leadenport. Witness accounts placed the demon here roughly 3 days before our arrival. Due to the delay, the trail has gone cold. Requesting 4 additional operatives to form an extended search party. At the bottom of the page was a red-stamped approval signature. Shinso flipped to the next entry. This one was dated 4 weeks ago. Demon located near Lab Brava. Initial approach will be diplomatic. If uncooperative, we will proceed with retrieval via subjugation and return to UA. Shinso couldn't help the faint snort that left his nose. If Kendo hadn't been there, Monoma would have opened with a monologue and a net trap, he muttered under his breath. Aizawa didn't comment. Just took another long sip from a lukewarm tea mug. Shinso turned to the final page. Kendo's handwriting was shakier this time. Engagement failed. Target demon refused invitation. Unexpected factor. Demon was accompanied by an unidentified partner. During attempted apprehension, the said partner countered with flame-based sorcery. Intensity of fire breath exceeded standard combat classification. 5 operatives suffered burns. Monoma and Ibris sustained additional injuries during close-range scuffle. Extraction required. Stapled to the back was a folded hospital invoice detailed potion use, burn salves, bone knit mixtures, and a ridiculous price for a set of phoenix feather bandages. Shinso sighed audibly and closed the file, setting it back down on the desk. Sounds like a disaster. Aizawa rubbed at his temple, eyes closed. It was. I thought with Kendo there. I did too, Aizawa cut in, voice flat. I thought she'd rein Monoma in. I underestimated how quickly things could go sideways. A silence settled between them. Eventually Shinso asked, and the demon's partner? Aizawa's head tilted slightly, the light catching the slight scar across his temple. No identification. No mana records. We don't know who it is. That was troubling. Shinso filed it away. Along with the fact that the demon had refused peacefully joining Yude and wanted no part of it. Where's Kaminari? Aizawa asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Shinso blinked. With Izuku. I see. Aizawa didn't comment further. He turned to another report, flipping the page with one hand while the other returned to its resting place across his chest. Shinso took that as his cue. He slid the file back onto the desk, gave a quiet nod, and made for the door. Just before stepping out, he glanced back once at his guardian instructor. Aizawa sat at his desk, perfectly still, surrounded by paper and ink and too many failures that came with too many responsibilities. And not enough answers. Shinso stepped out, letting the door hiss shut behind him. The U.Mage Academy library was nothing short of a sanctum. Vaulted ceilings arched high above, inlaid with metal ribs and glass panels charmed to dim or brighten with ambient magic. Mechanical chandeliers, powered by softly ticking mana circles, cast golden halos of light across the tables below. The scent of aged parchment, binding oils, and faint ozone hung in the air, mingling with the quiet, rhythmic hum of runic indexing shelves as they glided on hidden tracks between sections. In a far alcove tucked beneath an arched mezzanine, Izuku sat hunched over a thick, worn tome titled, The World Before the Collapse, a neutral account of the Shigaraki regime. Several more books teetered in towers around him, some half-read, others unopened but carefully sorted by category. He wasn't reading quickly. Just thoroughly. A slow, meticulous kind of study, the kind that came from a desperate need to understand. Across from him sat Kaminari, draped like laundry over his chair, limbs flopping at different angles and eyelids fluttering dangerously close to sleep. He groaned, raised his head, and stretched his arms until his back popped. Ugh, how the hell do you not get bored of this? You've been at it for hours. Literal hours, he whined. Izuku didn't respond. Not even a flick of the eye. Kaminari watched him for another beat, then muttered, Not even gonna pretend to listen, huh? Still nothing. That book doesn't even have any pictures, he said, shifting forward and peeking over the edge of the tome. Pre-collapse era, Izuku's fingers stilled on the page but said nothing. Kaminari snorted, stood up, and snatched the book away with a soft flump of paper. That finally made Izuku blink. He looked up slowly, his expression one of mild annoyance, like someone trying to decide if the interruption warranted a response. The silence cracked. It made Kaminari pause and gulp. Still he pushed on. I get it. Cool-sounding title. But that book is trash. Izuku's gaze cooled down and after a beat of silence gave him a faintly quizzical look. Trash? Bias trash, Kaminari clarified. The guy who wrote it was an anti-mage zealot. I only remember that, 'cause Aizawa threatened to kick me out of basic history for failing too many essays. He flopped back into his seat, holding the book between two fingers like it was contaminated. Velis Tren, the author? Total extremist. Hated magic. Hated mages. Hated anything that didn't bleed normally. Swore magic was a plague and that society would have been better off without any of us. He's got chapters calling cursed people walking errors and suggesting sterilization spells, ironical as it sounds. Izuku blinked slowly, staring at Kaminari, who had parrot the whole thing like he had copy-pasted it into his head. You memorized that? Mostly, Kaminari admitted, scratching his head. I failed twice before Aizawa sat me down and gave me the most horrifying hour-long rant of my life. Swore I'd remember it forever. He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. So, since you're clearly dying for facts, let me give you the Denki-approved and censored history of the collapse. Izuku gave him a flat look, finding the whole thing somewhat comical. You gave it a trademark. Of course, Kaminari said with a grin. Now pay attention, 'cause I only feel this educational once a year. He cleared his throat dramatically, pushing the piles of books aside to clear a space between them. Okay, let's rewind. 600 years before the collapse. The Todoroki Empire is crumbling. The Shigaraki Empire rises victorious, brutal, revolutionary. They end the war with one final push. And Shudo Todoroki dies in that final battle. That name. That single name. It hit like an axe. Izuku didn't flinch, but everything in him pulled inward. His hands clenched slightly at his sides. His posture stiffened. And something deep behind his eyes, the kind of pain that had festered for centuries, rose like smoke. Kaminari caught it. Just the edges. A twist in Izuku's jaw. A flicker in his breath. His gaze dropping like the weight of a memory had dragged his eyes down. Kaminari's voice faltered for half a second. Then he cleared his throat and softened slightly. Yurata Mage Academy was founded shortly after by Fuyumi Shigaraki and Yaoyorozu Momo, partly in honor of Shudo. He wasn't just a war hero. He was the first mage people actually believed in, a super charismatic person to look up to, basically. Izuku's mouth parted slightly. His expression wasn't blank anymore. It was shattered. Kaminari, although confused at witnessing such a response, observed yet lowered his voice as he continued. At the time, magic wasn't refined, of course there being exceptions like Shudo, Rei, and a few others. So, Yere became a hub to train unpolished mages. Support them. Build a society where they could thrive. He smiled faintly. And now here we are, 8 centuries later. Still standing. But Izuku wasn't smiling. He was frozen. One hand loosely clenched over his lap, eyes unfocused, like the words had unhooked something dangerous in his mind. Kaminari noticed. But he kept going. Softly now. Deliberately, to measure and observe his reactions. To know what more there was to him, since the latter was still a mystery to them. For a while it worked. The Shigaraki Empire flourished. 600 years of golden age. Mana-infused cities. Transportation powered by spell engines. Floating islands. Familiars integrated into the workforce. Magic in kitchens, medicine, agriculture. You name it. He shrugged. They called it the new Muzutafu, though I'm pretty sure that place never even existed. Izuku's lips parted again, this time shuffling uncomfortably in his seat. His breathing was shallow now. Not panicked anymore, but heavy, controlled, like a man forcing himself to stay in his body. But, Kaminari went on, not everyone was happy with shared power. His voice lowered, darkening. Some mages wanted it all. They broke off, founded secret factions, hoarded artifacts, performed illegal experiments. Sacrifices. They started disappearing people, kidnappings. First, it was political targets. Then dissenters. Manaless civilians. Kaminari's gaze dropped to the tabletop, and then, Viridescent appeared, at least that's what people called him. He said the name like it tasted rotten. No one knew where he came from. He didn't speak in public. Didn't claim lands. Didn't rally armies like a normal tyrant. He just arrived. And when he did, the world began to die. Izuku sat still as stone, realization dawning on his face. He controlled shadows like whips, like they were alive, Kaminari said. They whispered, hunted, drank the mana out of people, basically mana transfusion but through a very barbaric method. His eyes, those hollow green eyes, were all anyone ever saw before they were devoured. Kaminari's jaw tightened. He didn't conquer cities. He erased them, drowned them in silence, wiped out entire lineages. Manaless families were dragged out and branded like livestock. Cursed individuals and opposing mages were chained to towers and drained until their magic ran dry and they died. Children with mana were raised as mana batteries. Soon, the whole world started collapsing. The society broke down gradually. He swallowed. The air became toxic in some places, according to the records of the environmentalists of that time. Magic corrupted the land itself. Birds dropped from the sky. Rivers turned silver. Corpses were used in rituals to bind demon spirits to weapons, psycho stuff like that. His hand curled into a fist on the table, and through all of it, Viridescent never once showed his face. As if all of it was just a game to him. Honestly, you should read the case studies of that time, it'll make your blood boil. The silence that followed was vacuous. It swallowed the room. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glassy, not with tears, but with something worse, a mix of lividness and vengeance directed at an entity whose whole purpose was to play with him. It had been the case ever since he had awoken different, in the midst of a soulless kingdom, a skeleton of an enchanting era. Kaminari stared at him, noticed all of these emotions, studied him, but didn't have the heart to ignore him. "You okay?" Izuku didn't answer. Just looked at him, expression too tired for someone who couldn't. Kaminari cleared his throat and rubbed his arm awkwardly. "Anyway, Yurare made a deal, 2 centuries later. Put mages under protective surveillance. Gave cursed individuals contracts. IDs. A lifetime guarantee of safety." He shrugged half-heartedly. "Or a gilded cage, depending on who you ask." Silence spread again, until Izuku pulled himself back from whatever demons he was facing. His expression returning to his normal aloof one, and finally decided to speak, voice low and purposefully target. "So you had a brain after all." Kaminari blinked. Then he scowled. "Well, that's how you treat your personal history tutor." Izuku stood, making his way toward the hallway with a tired, stiff gait. Kaminari caught up quickly and slapped the back of his head lightly, but not too lightly. "Rude. I pour out the trauma of 800 years of empire bullshit, and all I get is sass. Unbelievable. You're banned from learning anything from me ever again." Izuku sighed, rubbing his head where he was slapped, but the tightness in his shoulders had lessened. A little. And as they exited the library's glowing halo, neither of them noticed the green light that flickered faintly in the automata's sensor behind them. The forest stretched in endless folds of fog-draped trees and rusting metal husks of old arcane machinery, half swallowed by earth and vine. Birds didn't sing here. Not loudly. The few who dared let out faint cries, more instinct than music. Kirishima had seen this kind of wilderness before. It was the kind that existed in the cracks of empire, forgotten, untamed, and uneasy in its stillness. A place the world had tried to erase, but couldn't quite manage to bury. Their campfire crackled softly within a hollow beside an ancient, half-toppled railway pylon. Long-dead mana conduits coiled around the nearby stone like veins, their glow long since faded to lifeless gray. Mist crawled across the dirt, hugging the edge of a low bank nearby where Kirishima had laid out snares earlier that day. Now, he crouched beside a battered iron skillet propped up on stacked stones, flipping over 2 seared strips of mackerel that popped and hissed over the flames. The faint clinks of brass buckles and leather straps came from behind him as Mina adjusted her cloak hood, still drawn low, casting her features in shadow. Even here, alone, she rarely let it drop. Her skin emitted faintly with its natural rose hue under the firelight, her curled horns barely hidden beneath the hood's edge. Gold eyes peeked from beneath it, reflecting the flame with a wary kind of sharpness that came from centuries of being watched. Kirishima sat beside her, fork in hand, and passed her a metal plate with 2 steaming pieces of fish. "Not the worst I've caught," he said with a grin. "Still smells like river mud, but hey, protein's protein." Mina took it without comment, biting into one with practiced calm. For a moment, they ate in peace. Then, mid-chew, she mumbled, "Think those guys made it out alive?" Kirishima blinked. "Huh." She swallowed and clarified, "The ones that came after us from you. The blonde, the redhead, and their crew." He shrugged, casually tearing his own fish apart with his fingers. I didn't exactly stick around to take attendance after the fire hit. Mina smirked, liking her thumb. Can't imagine they expected that. Nope, Kirishima said, voice full of mischief. Guess their fancy uniforms weren't strong enough to handle the inferno by yours truly. He paused. Then his expression sobered. Still, now that they know where we are, we gotta go even lower. Mina's grin turned into a grimace. Lower than this? We're already camping behind a rusted-out rail track with one tarp and a charm that smells like wet socks. Kirishima shrugged. We've done worse. She grinned at that. Then, after a long pause, she said softly, they gave me an invitation. Kirishima looked up mid-bite, brow raising. What? They didn't say UA outright, she interrupted. But what else would a sanctuary for cursed individuals and alike mean? You know what that really is. Kirishima set his plate down, wiping his hands on his pants. You said no. Of course I said no, she replied instantly, but her voice lacked the snap it usually carried. He watched her as she stared into the fire, her hood hiding most of her face but not enough to cover the tremble of her fingers as she pulled the blanket tighter around herself. I don't want a brand, she murmured. Or a collar dressed up as a contract. I've lived too long to hand over my freedom because someone in a lab coat smiles politely. She shivered. Not from the cold. From memory of solitude, of entrapment which she issued on herself. And now that she knew warmth and freedom, she didn't want to ever go back to it. Kirishima didn't speak right away. He stood, walked around the fire, and sat beside her without asking shoulder to shoulder. He reached behind them and pulled out a heavier wool blanket from his pack, then draped it across her shoulders gently. You're not going back to that, he said quietly. Mina's hand crept out from the blanket and caught his hand. She didn't hold on tightly since she knew he wouldn't let hers slip, like it was a promise of sorts. One of your perks, she said with a sniff, leaning her head against his shoulder. You run hot like a furnace. He chuckled, resting his chin lightly atop her hood. Yeah. All part of the service. They sat like that for a while, wrapped in silence that didn't need filling. Just the soft whisper of trees shifting. The embers crackling. The wind rustling the edges of their tarp tent. Then Kirishima reached up and ran his fingers through her pink curls, careful not to tug on the horn base. Mina leaned closer. No grand declarations. No swelling music. Just the truth between the quiet of two people who had held each other through centuries. The fire flickered, shadows dancing like ghosts around them. Above, the clouds shifted, revealing a crescent moon fractured in reflection by the cursed haze still lingering in the air. They didn't speak again. Not about the UA agents. Not about what they would do if they were found. For tonight they were free. Tomorrow would come with all its chains and smoke and choices. But tonight? They had warmth. They had food. They had each other. And for two hunted souls in a broken world, that was enough. The wasteland spread wide under a suffocating sky. A kingdom now reduced to ashen soil and jagged metal, the land bore the scars of mana corruption so deep, even the wind refused to howl here. Nothing grew. Nothing stirred. The sky had long forgotten how to rain. In the distance, a cathedral lay broken, its spires split like cracked bone, reaching toward a sky too heavy to answer. Its once pristine stained glass was shattered, fragments of color embedded in the ground like frozen blood. Chunks of marble and soot-streaked statues lay toppled, arms reaching upward in silent, petrified prayers. And in the dead silence, footsteps began to echo. So measured, almost reverent. A figure cloaked in darkness stepped into the remains of the sanctuary, boots crunching over shattered scripture and twisted brass offering plates. His long, tattered robe dragged behind him, embroidered in thread that shimmered green only when caught at the wrong angle like rot beneath moss. Around his shoulders, shadows clung like sentient smoke, curling with each breath he drew. Behind the heavy hood, his face was entirely lost to shadow except for his eyes. Two hollow green orbs, glowing faintly. Wrongly, they pulsed with something not alive. Not dead. Just endless. And he was singing. His voice was low and breathy, neither old nor that of a child's. Each note held a tremor, like the words had been etched into his bones rather than learned. The lullaby echoed through the crumbling pews, soaked in grief, coated in finality. Little light, little spark. Once you danced in holy dark. Now the stars have all gone blind. And sleep is all that's left to find. The cathedral, once sacred, now groaned as if reacting. Stone creaked. Shadow swayed. He passed beneath the shattered archway of the altar, where divine effigies once stood. Now only dust remained. The air was thick with magic that had turned stale, rotted by centuries of war. And behind him, quietly following on thin brass limbs, was an automata. Its metal frame was skeletal, bird-like, but human-shaped in outline, eyes blinking in steady green to match the figure it followed. Each blink from the automata's eyes synced unnaturally with the figure's footsteps. And still the man sang. Lover's vow turned fire-wrought chain. Friend's farewell became your bane. A son to mourn through all that pain. Now the world has burned too long. Ashes only sing this song. He reached the altar, what was left of it. Laid his gloved hand upon the cracked stone. Closed his eyes. A silence followed. Long tense. Holding its breath. Then, a slow, sick smile began to stretch beneath the hood. No joy. No mirth. Just something old and amused by the echo of his own tragedy. End it all, he whispered. A command? A plea? Even he didn't know anymore. Behind him, the automata clicked once. Its eyes flashed twice in succession as if recording something or rather someone. He turned, slowly, cloak dragging over the ash. He doesn't know it yet, the man said softly to no one. He will never know until it's already too late. The wind, which had dared not blow, stirred faintly now as if awakened by the memory of blood. And with his hollow eyes still glowing in the darkness, the figure stepped back into the ruins corridor. His lullaby resumed. Sleep now, sleep, the world is wide. No one remains, no stars to guide. Sleep, and burn the past away. Your sins, your name, your light, betray. And the wind died again, leaving only the fireless cathedral that incandescent. The scent of sterile floor, healing tonics, and overboiled tea hung in the still air of the infirmary. Somewhere in the corner, an automaton nurse muttered quietly to itself as it rearranged gauze and vials on a cluttered tray. A soft mana-powered fan whirred above, doing its best to move air around despite the humidity of recent burn salve treatments. Monoma, swathed in bandages like a particularly annoyed mummy, was currently reclining on a cot with his arms crossed and his nose turned high into the air, though the effect was undercut by the way his left leg was suspended in a levitation sling, awkwardly bobbing whenever he moved too much. Across from him stood Shinso, expression as impassive as ever, hands in his coat pockets. Beside him sat Kaminari on a stool, trying and failing not to laugh. "How are you feeling?" Shinso asked, voice flat and professional. Monoma snapped his head toward him with the grace of a disgruntled goose. "How do you think, Shinso?" he snapped. "I was literally flambéed." That was all Kaminari needed. A loud, choking snort escaped him before he broke into an unrestrained laugh. "Oh, come on," Kaminari said between wheezes. "You should be over the moon. Didn't you say you'd make history by capturing a sentient demon? This is it, man. First UA mage to be sautéed in the name of research. Someone get a plaque." Monoma's face turned bright red from anger and embarrassment. "Kendo! Kick him out," he screeched, waving his unbandaged arm wildly. "I am too injured to deal with the likes of him." From her seat near the medicine cabinet, Kendo didn't even look up from the chart she was filling out. "You could ask him nicely and maybe he'll listen." "I am asking nicely, kick him out." Kaminari crossed his arms, still smirking. "Hey, I don't see your name on the infirmary door. Public space, Monoma. Free country. You don't like my presence, you can cast a relocation spell." "Shinsu." Shinso sighed. "Denki." The tone was dry. Barely a ripple in the air. Kaminari blinked. "What? I didn't even." A sudden, subtle glow flickered across Shinsu's eyes. "Sit outside." Kaminari's mouth snapped shut mid-sentence. His body stiffened, turned, and obediently marched to the door. He opened it, stepped out, and the moment it shut and locked behind him, bang. 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 Shinsu, that was a low blow. I had a point to make. Monoma let out a long, deep sigh of relief, slumping slightly against the mound of pillows behind his back. Finally. Blessed silence. You're welcome, Shinso said, sitting in the now empty chair beside him. Kendo looked up with a small smile. That was maybe a little unfair. I call it strategic resource management, Shinso replied, deadpan. The banging outside continued, followed by what sounded suspiciously like a dramatic, high-pitched sigh and muttering something about backstabbing traitor. Shinso shook his head. Let's get to the point. Aizawa's already reassigned your mission to us. That drew the humor from Monoma's expression in an instant. His back straightened as much as the sling would allow. Of course he did, Monoma muttered. Kendo glanced at him, then turned to Shinso. We tracked the demon to Lab Brava. At that, Shinsu's brow rose. She was right there sitting beside the gentle river, and it seemed like her partner had just dived into it. Kendo continued. She. Shinso echoed. Monoma gave a theatrical groan. This is a pink-skinned menace with glowing gold eyes and the temperament of a tourist. She and her partner should book a personal room for all the flirting they did in broad daylight. She didn't attack you first? Shinso asked, ignoring the prude comments of the blonde. No, Kendo said, shaking her head. She was wary but calm. Let me approach. I introduced us, said we were from UA, explained the mission parameters, tried to frame it as an offer, not an order. Shinso caught the flicker in Kendo's expression. Her hand flinched over her wrist where the edge of a burn mark peeked from under her sleeve. She refused, Kendo said quietly. Said she didn't want to be tagged and tracked. I tried to explain the protections. That we wanted to learn more about her kind. Shinso leaned forward slightly. And then? Monoma let out a bitter chuckle, then the red-haired Biggie showed up. Red hair, Shinso repeated, making a mental note, male. Human? No idea about his race, but he was strong enough to turn half our team into barbecue, Monoma muttered, rubbing the side of his head. He came out of the river and just boom. No warning. No chance. Pure combustion. Kendo's voice dropped. It wasn't like any fire I've ever seen. It didn't burn, it ate. Like the air itself turned hostile. I barely had time to shield the other two. Shinso was silent for a beat. He studied her, the heaviness behind her words. Then, as if summoned by a dramatic cue thud, Kaminari kicked the door one last time from outside. Just so you know, he shouted, voice muffled through the wood, if you want to die tragically, you can go talk to Fireboy yourself. I'm not invited. His footsteps stormed away, growing distant. Monoma snorted. That guy's high maintenance. Shinso exhaled slowly, one hand resting against his temple. He's got a point, though. He looked at Kendo. We need to avoid a head-on fight this time. Kendo nodded solemnly. You won't get another warning blast. That guy's the real danger. Shinsu's gaze drifted to the doorway. Then we need a new approach. And from somewhere down the hallway, Kaminari's voice shouted one last thing. I'll be at the training area. Try not to plan my murder without me. God, he's such a drama queen. Monoma huffed out, earning a chuckle from Shinso, who looked at the file in which Aizawa had debriefed them about their mission in silence. The training grounds of UA bustled with late afternoon activity. Arcane sigils shimmered in the cobblestone floor, glowing with residual mana from the students' latest bout. Two younger mages were locked in a mock duel, one launching streaks of electric blue magic from a hexed gauntlet, the other deflecting them with shimmering wind barriers laced with polished copper talismans. Steam hissed from a series of brass pistons embedded in the arena walls, powering protective wards that flared every time a spell veered too close to the Watcher's edge. Izuku stood at the far end of the observation balcony, wearing a uniform which was assigned to him temporarily. His sharp green eyes flicked across the battle, not just watching the duel, but analyzing it. There was elegance in the structure of the fight. The movement of spells. The layered, codified chanting that hadn't existed in his time. Behind him, Kaminari leaned against the rusted railing like it owed him money, halfway through a loud, continuous complaint. And then, Kaminari huffed. He just mind-controlled me out the door like I was an idiot, which is so unfair because I am an idiot, but that should not be the grounds for him to use sorcery on his partner. Izuku gave no reply, his eyes tracking a mage shifting a thunderglyph from a physical scroll into raw air with a flick of the wrist. I mean, seriously. Kaminari, leave the room. Kaminari, shut up. He mimicked bitterly. Nobody ever uses Shinsu's quirk on Shinso, do they? Still no response. Kaminari groaned and let his head fall back against a steam pipe with a dull thunk. It's fine. I'm fine. Just had my pride obliterated in front of the smug prince of pretension. He paused mid-rant, frowning. Wait, are you even listening to me? Izuku's only movement was the faint arch of a brow. You were saying something about being a humble victim of injustice? Kaminari gave him a betrayed look. Wow. I open up and this is what I get. But Izuku's gaze sharpened when Kaminari added, anyway, now we've got to go to Lab Brava this week and I definitely didn't want that, not this soon. At that, Izuku turned. You're going out on a mission? Kaminari narrowed his eyes, visibly annoyed. Now you're listening? Izuku didn't answer. His stare was sharp, alert, curious. Kaminari sighed and folded his arms. Yeah. Professor, Zawa transferred Monoma's mission over to us. Izuku tilted his head, the gears behind his eyes practically visible. Weren't you two supposed to be babysitting me for the next few months? He asked, and the way he mimicked Kaminari's usual phrasing nearly made the latter laugh again. Hey, I call it like I see it, Kaminari said, smirking. But yeah, I thought so too. Guess the prof's going to assign someone else to your hand-holding sessions while we're out, probably. Izuku's eyes flicked toward the distant spires of the academy, then back to Kaminari. Can I tag along? Kaminari blinked. Wait, you want to come with us? Already sick of this place? Izuku gave a small shrug, non-committal. This place is unnerving. Too safe. Too sane, Kaminari muttered under his breath, before letting out a deep sigh and patting Izuku's shoulder. Sorry, but academy rules. Undergraduates don't get to go on missions. Liability stuff. Izuku raised a brow. I wouldn't be unsupervised. You and Shinso would be there. Still not my call. I'm just the hot one, Kaminari said, raising both hands. I don't make policy, I ignore it artistically, as much as possible. Izuku's lips tugged upward at that just barely. What if I ask Aizawa myself? Kaminari was already shaking his head when a third voice interrupted. You won't have to. Both turned to see Shinso stepping onto the platform, shadowed by one of the training field's towering brass columns. His long coat fluttered faintly behind him, and he carried a slim black folder tucked beneath one arm. I already asked him, Shinso continued. Tone matter of fact. He approved it under probationary terms. You're cleared to accompany us. Kaminari raised his brows. You what? When were you going to tell me that? Shinso signed back casually with one hand, a subtle flick of fingers that translated to, I'm telling you now. Kaminari rolled his eyes. Unbelievable. First you mind control me out of a room, and now you're plotting behind my back? Is this friendship or an espionage thriller? Shinso ignored him and turned to Izuku, pulling the file from under his arm. Here. Inside is an enchanted audioglyph crystal. Basic mission overview, target zone, operational boundaries. It's tuned to your comprehension threshold, so it'll adjust speed and diction for clarity. Izuku took the folder gently, looking at the elegant golden seal that shimmered with faint runes. He opened it slowly, his expression changing from guarded to curious as if he were holding something alien yet familiar. Like an artifact from a world he hadn't yet caught up to. His fingers brushed the crystal inside. It pulsed faintly as if responding to his touch. Prepare accordingly if you're still willing to go, Shinso said simply. We set off in 3 days. He turned on his heel and walked off without another word. Kaminari watched him go, still visibly annoyed. You see what I deal with? Izuku didn't respond. He had already crouched by the edge of the training platform, turning the crystal over in his fingers, eyes wide with thought like a child handling a relic, or a soldier holding a map back into war. The cafeteria was a strange blend of ancient stone and industrial steel. Copper pipes curled across the ceiling like veins, hissing quietly as steam pulsed through them to power the stoves and mana stirrers. Arched stained glass windows cast soft, colored light onto long ironwood tables where students and mages gathered in their respective cliques. At one of the back tables, tucked between a smoking stew pot and a levitating bread tray, Kaminari and Shinso sat in comparative silence. Plates half filled with spicy rice, roasted fennel, and steaming broth sat untouched. Kaminari poked at his food with a fork. "All right," he finally said, voice low but sharp, "spill it already." Shinso didn't look up right away. He speared a sliver of roasted meat and chewed thoughtfully. Then, with a sigh, he set his fork down. "The demon's partner is strong. Too strong." Kaminari frowned. "We already knew that." Shinsu's tone remained even, not strong like talented. Strong like if we fight them directly we lose. That shut Kaminari up for a second as if his mind had started to connect the dots and he was not liking what Shinso was implying. Shinso continued, voice lowering, noticing the blonde's expression change from a quizzical look to a scowl. "What happened to Monoma's team wasn't just bad luck. They went in with a numbers advantage and an experienced lead. Still got turned into toast. So if we want to avoid a repeat, we use a decoy." He let the words hang there just long enough to sting. "Izuku." Kaminari's eyes narrowed. Shinso didn't flinch. "He can regenerate. He's immune to any injury. He can hold attention long enough for us to move in. If anyone gets hurt, he won't." There was a beat. Then slam. The entire cafeteria quieted for a heartbeat as Kaminari's fist crashed into the tabletop, rattling cutlery and knocking over a salt vial. "So we're using him as bait?" he hissed. Shinso exhaled. "Decoy. Not bait. There's a difference." "Not to me, there isn't." Kaminari snapped. "You're justifying this with logic, but have you actually looked at the guy? He's still recovering. Not too long ago he took every chance to kill himself. He barely understands half the crap in this world and you want to throw him into a potentially lethal confrontation on a hunch. So like what, he'll relapse? God, Shinso. Are you really that heartless?" Shinso kept his tone measured. "He'll be with us the whole time. He won't be alone." "That's not the point." Kaminari stood, electricity crackling from his palms. "He's not some unkillable shield for us to hide behind. He's not a tool. He still feels the pain even if he regenerates." Shinsu's jaw tightened. "I'm not saying we don't care. I'm saying he has the right to choose. If he wants to come, if he wants to stand and do something, are you going to be the one to stop him? Or just cage him in this place forever?" Kaminari was silent, fists clenched at his sides. The silence between them throbbed like a wound. And then zap. A quick, harmless shock arced through the air and hit Shinso in the shoulder. The cafe gasped as Shinso flinched slightly, his hair puffing outward in static-swept tufts. "You're unbelievable," Kaminari muttered, before turning on his heel and storming out through the back hall. A small mana-powered lamp overhead popped and fizzled as he passed beneath it. The ambient noise in the cafeteria slowly resumed, whispers blooming. Shinso didn't move at first. He rubbed his shoulder absently, fingers twitching through the frizzed-out strands of purple hair now sticking out in ridiculous directions. A soft sigh escaped him. "That could have been worse," he muttered. Then he folded his arms on the table and rested his forehead against them, eyes closed. He didn't move for a long while. Outside the stained glass, the orange hue of early evening light fractured across the table, tinting Shinso in warm, melting tones. For a man built on composure and control, the stillness looked a lot like exhaustion. It's not just strategy, he thought, it's survival. But even as he tried to convince himself, that small flicker of doubt gnawed quietly in his chest. The blonde had a way to get into his head, it seemed. The wasteland stretched for miles ash-gray, as if the land had long since given up trying to be alive. Ruined structures, cathedrals half-sunken into the ground, steeples jagged and crumbling, spires warped by mana corrosion until they bent like twisted fingers clawing at the sky. Here, nature had long since retreated. In its place, mana-rot-festered patches of shimmering mist clung low to the earth, casting an iridescent glow that promised beauty and delivered decay. Mina, her hood drawn tight and a copperan silk breathing mask strapped across her mouth and nose, let out a huff of air that wheezed past the filter. Her boots scraped through the thin black dust that coated everything. "Why," she muttered, "did the most cursed place on earth have to look like an abandoned art exhibit?" "Because cursed places have no taste," replied Kirishima, marching beside her with a large rucksack slung over his shoulder, his thick coat rippling in the foul wind. Even under the strain of the terrain, he looked composed, unbothered, as if the toxic air didn't even register to him. Mina let out a muffled groan and stumbled slightly, one hand bracing against the exposed frame of a collapsed stone arch. "I hate that this works on me." Kirishima turned, brow furrowed. "You okay?" Yeah. She waved him off, even as her knees wobbled beneath her. "Demon blood, my butt? What kind of hybrid gets winded in magical smog?" A beat later, she collapsed forward. Kirishima caught her instantly. "Easy," he said, voice soft. Mina buried her masked face in his shoulder, groaning into the coarse fabric of his jacket. "I hate this." Kirishima chuckled, adjusting his hold to scoop her into his arms like she weighed nothing. "You say that every time I carry you," he teased. "Starting to think you like it?" "Shut up," she mumbled, curling her arms around his neck as he started walking again. Her head rested in the crook of his shoulder, but her eyes lingered on him. His skin looked untouched by the corrupted air, his breath easy and even. "Maybe it's because you're a dragon," she murmured. "You're like a natural heater, and have a freakish immune system." "Perks of being ancient and scaly, I guess," he joked. They walked in silence for another minute. Then, suddenly, Kirishima halted. The air changed. Subtle but clear. Like the pressure of a room shifting when someone else enters. "I drew?" Mina asked, lifting her head. Kirishima didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the cathedral ruins ahead, one of the few structures that still resembled what it once was. Its stone bones jutted proudly against the haze, the shattered rose window above the arch dripping in fragmented stained glass. And at its peak, perched casually on the roof like a gargoyle or a child on a swing, sat a figure. Legs crossed at the ankles, swaying, like he had no care in the world. "Hey," the figure called. The voice was smooth, pleasant, even. A honeyed tone with a sharp aftertaste. Danger dressed in silk. It slithered across the ruins. Kirishima's entire frame went rigid. He lowered Mina slowly. She stepped beside him, eyes narrowed beneath the hood. The figure, viridescent, tilted his head. From this distance, only the hollow green glow of his eyes was visible beneath the hood. But it was enough. "You know," he said, still swinging his legs lazily, "I always wondered why you were so against joining Yamina." The air grew heavier. The very wind slowed. Mina stiffened upon hearing her own name. "Who the hell are you?" Kirishima growled. "Relax," Viridescent replied, lifting one hand in a disarming wave. "I'm not here to kill you. Not today. Scout's honor." Kirishima stepped forward, half shielding Mina with his body. Viridescent's gaze drifted lazily from Kirishima to the sky above, and for a moment, something in his posture faltered. A twitch. A whisper of pain or maybe nostalgia. "Shame, really," he muttered to himself. "He's at you too, you know." Kirishima blinked. "Who?" Viridescent looked down at him, smiling now, a crescent moon smile, cold and eerie. "Oh, you'll join too," he said, voice giddy with certainty. "One way or another." And with that he vanished. In an instant, he was just there, inches from Kirishima's face. No sound. No movement. Just presence. Kirishima recoiled instinctively, fire bursting from his chest in a defensive roar. Viridescent merely raised a hand. Shadows slithered up from the ground like snakes, wrapping around the flames, snuffing them out without even a hiss. "Tiesuke, I said not today, AG." He leaned in, uncomfortably close. Mina didn't hesitate. She grabbed a spade from her belt, flung it like a missile at the stranger's head. Viridescent ducked with a theatrical twirl. "Feisty as always." "Hey, don't be like this, AG. Tell her to accept the invite, come on." He pleaded with no emotion in his eyes and turned away, cloak billowing like a curtain, but I guess I have nothing to worry about. You two'll come around. You're with UA? Mina shouted, furious. Some twisted undercover freak? Show us your face, coward. Viridescent turned slightly, just enough to lift a hand in a mocking wave. No. I'm just invested. His tone darkened. And I do hope you stop fighting it, Mina. Fate's already decided. If you resist, well, he smiled wider, it wouldn't be any fun. Kirishima snarled, fire curling in his mouth as his arms thickened, scales rippling across his skin, horns starting to push through his hair. Viridescent laughed a venomous, delighted sound. Oh? So soon? How nostalgic. And just like that the sky blackened. Shadows rippled like waves across the ruins. The cathedral cracked with the sound of a distant scream. Wind stilled, silence pressed in, and Viridescent's voice echoed, "It was fun meeting you again, after so long." And then he was gone. Swallowed by the dark. The air returned. The world resumed. Mina exhaled slowly, her hands clenched so tight her nails had dug crescent moons into her palms. Kirishima's flames faded. He stared at the roof where the figure had sat. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Neither had an answer. But both knew something had started moving, like the cogs of a wheel had assembled and time had started its sorrowful tune yet again, and again and again. The UA aviation dock buzzed with the electric hum of morning activity, alive with the grind and hiss of arcane machinery, steam valves spitting mist into the cool air as the golden light of dawn filtered through the glass-paneled dome that housed the dockyard's upper atrium. Enormous brass support columns towered over the space, pipes and gears inlaid with glowing glyphs of propulsion magic. A dozen different airships hovered or docked at various heights, their bronze and chrome hulls emblazoned with the UA insignia, a stylized rune inside a gear. Down on Dock 9, just under the shadow of a mid-sized cruiser airship named the Mecha Might, Kaminari adjusted the strap of his arc regulator and gave the disinterested figure beside him a long, deadpan look. "Izuku," Kaminari began, his tone the kind someone might use with an unruly toddler or a suicidal near sharp knives, "we've been over this." Izuku didn't respond. He was staring across the dock with distracted fascination, eyes fixed on an automata porter, a spindly, gear-legged thing shaped vaguely like a praying mantis as it carefully lifted a trunk larger than itself and loaded it onto the cargo bay of another airship. Its mechanical voice chirped as it sorted through items with pre-programmed precision. Kaminari clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, eyes over here, man. We're talking about you not yeeting yourself off the airship like last time." Still no response. Izuku's gaze had drifted to another automata nearby that was politely telling a mage his excess baggage fees in 3 languages. Kaminari sighed, louder this time. "Let's review, shall we?" He began counting off on his fingers. No jumping into the mana furnace. No testing how fast gravity works from the observation deck. And definitely no trying to hang yourself with the cable from the lantern sconce. That was gruesome and rude to the decor. Izuku blinked slowly. "I didn't try to hang myself," he mumbled, finally acknowledging the conversation. "I was testing tensile strength?" Kaminari barked a humorless laugh. "Sure, buddy. And I electrocuted that river just to check for fish. Capiche?" He poked Izuku lightly in the sternum for emphasis. Izuku gave a long-suffering sigh and glanced toward the airship, where Shinso was already standing at the gangplank, arms crossed, expression unreadable, save for the faintly irritated twitch in his brow. He raised a hand and gestured for them to hurry up as the horn overhead gave a low, drawn-out groan of departure warning. "Capiche," Izuku muttered, clearly not caring. "Ugh, that's the sound of someone not promising not to get themselves horribly mangled," Kaminari groaned, dragging a hand down his face. "This is going to be the longest trip of my life." The two finally began walking toward the boarding ramp, the wind from the ship's mana turbines ruffling their coats as steam hissed and automata zipped past them with precision. The dock workers called out boarding orders while flares of rune light shimmered on the airship's hull. Kaminari stepped onto the ramp first and without so much as a glance brushed past Shinso. Shinsu's head tilted slightly, eyes following him with a flicker of discomfort. "Morning," he said cautiously, almost like a peace offering. Kaminari didn't even acknowledge him. Make sure we don't get a cabin next to the furnace room. I'm not babysitting Mr. Suicidal next to open flame again, he muttered to no one in particular, pulling his collar tighter around his neck as he walked ahead. The air between them crackled with something heavy. Something that had been simmering since the cafeteria conversation days ago. Izuku could feel it even from where he stood, stepping onto the deck just behind them. He glanced from one to the other, watching Shinsu's brow furrow as Kaminari continued walking without even a backward glance. The tension was briefly broken when Izuku approached the rail on the edge of the deck and leaned over, gazing with detached curiosity at the swarming crowd below. Kaminari, noticing this, immediately sprinted toward him with a panicked, "No. Don't." Passengers around them turned their heads, eyebrows raising as the blonde practically threw himself toward Izuku, grabbing his coat. "I'm not going to jump," Izuku said flatly, not moving from his place. Kaminari didn't loosen his grip. "You say that and then next thing I know you're dangling from the railing like some idiot." One of the older mages standing nearby gave a small, judgmental cough. Another leaned toward her friend and whispered something into her ear. Shinso let out a slow exhale from where he stood at the opposite end of the deck, already exhausted. Kaminari dragged Izuku away from the railing with one hand still gripped on his sleeve. "Okay, that's enough sightseeing for you." Behind them, the crew activated the anchor glyphs and the airship shuddered as it began to rise, drifting off the dock and out into the sky. Shinso watched Kaminari silently tug Izuku by the coat as they walked toward the staircase to their cabin deck. The blonde still hadn't said a word to him. The purple head looked down at his own hands, flexed his fingers, then let out a soft breath. Had he crossed a line in that argument? If so, he didn't know how or if he could cross back. The scorched earth groaned beneath Kirishima's heavy boots as he trudged across the cracked ridge of what was once a lush field. The mana corruption had turned the air syrupy and thick, a perpetual haze of sickly green mist rolling low across the path behind them. Burnt trees stood like blackened bones, brittle and hollow, casting twisted shadows that followed them with quiet hostility. Slung across his back, arms looped lazily around his neck, Mina gave a quiet groan that crackled through her respirator. "Ugh, remind me again why this was the bright idea?" "Because," Kirishima puffed, not even winded, "you said you wanted to throw them off. You wanted to go through the ruins because the mages wouldn't follow us in there, remember?" Mina exhaled sharply through her mask. "Right? Because if I were the one with fire-breathing capabilities, I'd make us take the route with fresh air." Kirishima chuckled under his breath, adjusting her weight slightly. "Fresh air's for the uncommitted," he quipped. "We're outlaws now. Suffering's part of the aesthetic." Mina half-heartedly kicked the side of his thigh, the motion lacking any real force. "You're enjoying this. Admit it." He looked over his shoulder, his toothy grin flashing through the haze. "Carrying you through cursed fog like some knight in shining armor? I'm getting a workout. Gotta keep the glutes heroic." Mina gave a tired snort. "Yeah, heroic glutes," she muttered, hard to argue with the classics. "You checking out my butt, Mina?" he teased, not turning around. "Please, I've been on it for hours. I have a full report ready for publishing." Kirishima barked out a laugh but was quick to cover it with a cough, as if embarrassed by how loud it echoed across the silent wasteland. The laughter faded into quiet again. The city behind them was long gone, its skyline swallowed by the distant green fogbank. Mina's arms around his neck had gone slack, and her breath came in shallow pulses against his shoulder. Kirishima's brows furrowed. "Hey," he said gently, "you're really pushing it. We're stopping at the next town. You're getting checked out." "I told you," she mumbled, her voice muffled against his collar. "Just need a nap. Mana sickness, it passes." He didn't answer, just adjusted her higher on his back and kept walking. When she realized he was ignoring her completely, she groaned, "You're impossible. Stubborn. Rock-headed. You're just gonna drag me into the clinic and charm your way into the medic's good graces again, huh? You say that like it's a bad thing." She chuckled weakly, shifting her face into the crook of his neck. letting herself sink into the comfort for a moment before continuing, quieter now, thanks, though. Kirishima blinked, caught off guard by the softness in her voice. For what? For not saying I told you so, she said, teasing. You know, not leaving me behind back then. Back where she had burned her past into ashes, back when she had lost her only connection, back when she was lost on what she would do next. But Kirishima was there. He had burned her dark past away, he had been with her ever since. He smiled but didn't say anything. Just readjusted his grip on her thighs and walked on. The corrupted land was finally starting to give way to rocky outcrops and healthier trees in the distance. They weren't out of the danger zone yet, but the horizon was starting to clear. Then Mina added, and for keeping the glutes heroic, obviously. Kirishima groaned with a blush that turned his ears scarlet. Mina! What? I'm just appreciating the view. You're literally hanging off my back. Yeah, and it's a great seat. He shook his head, trying and failing not to laugh. You're unbelievable. Damn right I am. And don't forget, I live for making your life harder, and I think that's not the only thing that gets hard though. Now you're simply pushing it. Sick or not, I won't hold back. But try me, and I bet I'd like it too. Though, you're too much of a gentleman to ever do that. Kirishima glanced up at the thinning clouds, groaning in defeat and finally letting a sigh out. Well, he said, that's love for you. The banter stilled after that. Mina let her eyes close against the rhythmic bounce of his gait, heart slowing, warmth spreading from the inside despite the lingering chills of mana exposure. Kirishima looked back at her, face softened in the quiet. Whatever else happens, no matter how long they had to run, he'd carry her through all of it. The airship hummed quietly beneath them, its engines producing a low, almost soothing thrum that vibrated gently through the floorboards and walls. Sunlight filtered in through the thick glass pane windows, casting elongated golden streaks over the cabin floor, catching dust motes midair like floating fireflies. A thin whistle of wind leaked in between the bolted seams of the windows, carrying with it the scent of the high atmosphere, clean, cold, and distant. Izuku blinked awake slowly, disoriented at first. He stretched, bones cracking, arms reaching for the ceiling as he let out a silent yawn. The coarse fabric of the bunk mattress rustled beneath him as he sat up, ruffling his already wild curls. He squinted, bleary-eyed, taking in the scene before him. Kaminari lay sprawled on his bed, one leg dangling off the edge, a faint snore escaping his open mouth. The blanket had half fallen onto the floor, and a small drool stain threatened the edge of his pillow. Across the small cabin, Shinso sat by the window in a battered armchair, posture relaxed, book in hand. His fingers slowly turned a page as he read, light from the window bathing the side of his face in gold, throwing the other into shadow. The greenet swung his legs over the edge of the bed and sat there for a moment, watching him. The atmosphere in the room was silent but not still. It was heavy, charged with something unspoken. Shinso looked up from the book as he sensed movement. His gaze was unreadable. You're up, he said simply. Izuku nodded, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Yeah. Shinso closed the book slightly and tilted his head. We'll be docking at Daigon soon. Wake up, Kaminari, would you? We need to get our luggage ready. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Why don't you do it? He's your partner, isn't he? Shinso paused. There was a beat. Then he shrugged, feigning indifference. He sleeps like a log. And I don't feel like doing it. Izuku didn't press, but he had noticed the subtle tightness in Shinso's jaw, the way he had avoided looking in Kaminari's direction as if he was ashamed of something. The silence stretched between them until Izuku's gaze drifted down. The book. He leaned forward a little. What are you reading? Shinso blinked, surprised that Izuku was initiating a conversation. He looked at the cover, then back at him. Memoir of Forgetments. By Shiro. Izuku's gaze sharpened slightly at the name. He stood slowly, walking the few steps toward the chair. Shiro, he repeated quietly. Shiro Hanta? Yeah, Shinso said. He opened the book a little more as if to show him. It started as Shudo Todoroki's journal. After he died, Shiro took it up and turned it into a biography. Documented everything. His life, the academy. Fuyumi. Himself. Even bits about Rei, Tamura and the war. A shadow fell over Izuku's face at the name. Shinso didn't notice, or maybe he did, but he kept going, leaning forward now, invested. It's actually amazing. Shiro had a real gift for words. But you know what's weird? He wrote a whole chapter about Shudo's father, but it's all vague. Barely a name. Not much details. Gone. Izuku turned his head away. Shinso didn't stop. And the funny thing is, the guy had the same name as you. Isn't that? Maybe, Izuku said, his voice sharp and cutting, maybe he wasn't mentioned because he was a worthless, cowardly parent who couldn't even save his own son. Shinso stopped cold. The air between them thickened. Izuku stared straight ahead, breathing slow and shaky. Maybe he didn't deserve to be written about. He then turned abruptly and strode toward the door. I'll get the luggage. The door clicked softly behind him. A long moment passed. From behind Shinso, a sleepy groan. Kaminari, rubbing his eyes, sat up slowly on the bed. He stared after the closed door, lips pulling into a tight line. Then he looked over at Shinso, who was still frozen in his seat. Idiot, Kaminari muttered. Shinso blinked. What? Kaminari flopped back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Then, in a perfect, deadpan imitation of Shinso, he said, and the funny thing is, he had the same name as you. Shinso's jaw slackened. Kaminari rolled to his side, propping himself up on one elbow. You really didn't get it? Shinso didn't answer. Kaminari let out a tired sigh. Close your mouth or flies are gonna sneak in. The hustle of the aviation dock hummed in the background, steam vents hissing, automata clanking on reinforced stilts, and the muffled murmur of arriving passengers collecting their luggage. Izuku stood in line at the cargo retrieval station, bronze glyph tickets in hand, his eyes vacant, far away. The flickering lights overhead cast sharp silhouettes, blinking off the lacquered brass surfaces of the unloader automata. He barely registered the buzzing sound of their mechanical limbs sorting luggage from the underbelly of the airship. Someone ahead of him handed over a glyph with a polite nod. Another offered a tip. Someone argued. All distant noise. Izuku stood in silence, the 3 tickets clenched tightly in his hand. The weight of a memory pulled him under. Rain came down in thin, endless needles. Not a thunderstorm, not a tempest, just that steady, insistent kind of rain that seeps into your bones. The palace courtyard had been adorned in black banners. The entirety of the Shigaraki Empire was in mourning. Lanterns flickered in the wind, their warm glow unable to cut through the heavy gray that blanketed the skies. No body lay in the casket. What remained of Shudo had been turned to ash in the blast. The casket stood as symbol only of a son lost, of a warrior fallen. Izuku stood still, soaked to the skin, clad in the same battle-worn armor he had worn days before. Blood, some dried, some washed into rust streaks, still painted the jagged edges of his cuirass. He hadn't removed it. Couldn't. Somehow it felt wrong to. Momo knelt by the casket, her hands trembling against the polished wood, her voice broken in its mourning. She was sobbing uncontrollably, gasping Shudo's name like it could bring him back. Fuyumi had collapsed beside her, arms thrown around the brunette, both of them crying into each other's shoulders. Rei sat alone beneath a canopy, her pale hands clenched in her lap, her hair loose and rain-matted. Her eyes, red-rimmed and haunted, stared through the falling rain at nothing at all. But Izuku, he was unmoving. Not a word. Not a single tremor. The rain soaked through his green curls, slicked to his forehead, ran down his cheeks in rivulets that blurred into his expressionless face. If he could die, he would have welcomed it. If he was given the chance, he would beg death to take him then and there. But immortality had cursed him beyond that mercy. Footsteps sloshed gently through the mud behind him. Izuku didn't turn. Izuku, a familiar voice called out, soft, choked. Izuku blinked slowly, then turned his head just slightly. Shiro stood there, dressed in formal morning wear, drenched like the rest of them. His eyes were swollen and red. His hands trembled around something, a small, leather-bound book, edges soaked at the corners but carefully shielded under his coat. I think he would have wanted you to read this, Shiro whispered. Izuku's gaze dropped to the book. For a long moment, he just stared at it just like he'd stared at the casket. He didn't move. Shiro took a step closer, his voice unsteady. It's his diary. He wrote so much about you. About all of us. Shiro swallowed. He never stopped caring. Not once. The rain poured on. Izuku slowly raised one gauntlet hand. The book passed into it quietly. For a long while, Izuku didn't move. Then, as if cradling something fragile, precious, he lifted the diary with both hands. His thumbs brushed the water-warped leather. His mouth parted barely. He couldn't breathe. The courtyard had grown quiet. The evening sun cut long golden S through the rain-drenched awnings, pooling over the stone walkways where puddles still glistened like broken glass. The courtyard was empty now. The banners of mourning, soaked and limp, fluttered no longer. The servants had all retreated. The family had gone to rest or grieve in private. But Izuku remained. He sat alone on a low stone bench near the ceremonial fountain, now dry and crusted with petals left from the rites. In his lap rested the diary Shiro had handed him earlier that morning. It was a humble thing, worn leather, hand-bound, edges warped from the rain despite Shiro's attempts to shield it. Izuku had not opened it. Not until now. His gauntlets had been removed at last, his arms bare and streaked with dried blood and pale bruises. His fingertips shook slightly as they traced the cover, as if afraid the ink inside might burn him alive. But he flipped it open. And read. At first, the entries were mundane shudo detailing morning sparring, tea with Fuyumi, the occasional practices with him. A quiet dinner with Tamura. But then came the pieces that gripped him. That pinned him to this earth like gravity. My eyes searched for Izuku instinct, I guess. For someone who would clap even if I lost, but I never found him. I kept wondering if he'd stayed at the inn. If he hadn't wanted to come. I wonder if he's proud. I still wished he'd seen me win. Izuku swallowed hard, his knuckles whitening around the leather. He had wanted to go. But he told himself Shudo wouldn't want him there. That he'd be a shadow, a stain on the day. He had stood outside the Colosseum gates, staring in, and walked away. Oh, how wrong he had been. There's a distance now between us. Me and Izuku. He hasn't changed, not really. He still tries. Still looks at me the same. But I feel it. And the truth is, it's not him. It's me. I pulled away. I held back. And now, I don't know how to step forward again. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. He remembered those days, Shuto drifting further, shoulders tense at the dinner table, smiles rarer. He had thought it was simply adulthood. Independence. Growth. Avoidance. But it had all been pain. Some days I wonder, does he regret it? Taking me in? Other days I wonder if he's just too kind to say so. I want to talk to him. I want things to be like they were before. I want to laugh with him like I used to. But the words get stuck. The silence wins. And I hate it. Oh. I hope it's not too late. That broke him. The pages quivered in his hands as sobs clawed up his throat. He tried to hold them in. No, Shudo, he choked, voice barely a whisper. No, it was me. I was the coward. You were always brave. His head bowed over the pages as silent sobs racked his chest. His shoulders shook, his breathing stuttered. I should have told you. I should have held you close. I thought I'd make it worse. But you were the best thing in my life. I just didn't know how to tell you. His tears soaked into the parchment, the ink bleeding slightly as he pressed trembling fingers over the words. As if trying to hold. As if they were the last remnants of his son. The last chance he'd never taken. Regret didn't even begin to describe the thing clawing inside him. It was deeper. Uglier. Not just that he'd lost Shudo, but that he had failed him. Eventually, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows lengthened like fingers over the courtyard stones, Izuku tore the pages free. The ones addressed to him. Pages he didn't deserve to exist in. He folded them carefully and slid them inside the folds of his tunic, tucked near his heart. The rest of the diary he would return to Shiro. But these he would carry with him. A penance. A remembrance. He looked up at the sky, dark and scattered with the first stars. I'm sorry, he whispered to it. I'm so sorry. Izuku blinked back into the present, the heaviness of memory still pressing behind his eyes. His expression schooled, distant, calm. He stepped forward and handed over the 3 bronze glyphs. The automaton scanned them with a sharp chime and began retrieving the luggage from the conveyor. A sharp voice cut in from the side. "That'll be a surcharge," barked the unloader. He stood leaned against a pipe, arms folded, unimpressed. His coat bore the gilt crest of Daigon's civilian operations, but the sneer on his face was all too familiar. "4 mages," he clarified, tapping a greasy ledger. "You know, hazard pay." Izuku didn't flinch. He turned his head slowly, gaze meeting the man's. Unblinking. Silent. His emerald eyes hollowed by time and grief and things no man should have lived through bored into the unloaders. No rage. No threat. Just wait. Ancient, cold, and unbearably heavy. The unloader paled slightly. Coughed. Then waved his hand vaguely. "Or not. You're good to go. Automata's got it." The brass automaton wheeled back toward Izuku with the bags. 3 large canvas travel packs. One bearing Kaminari's personal crest, another with Shinsu's initials marked in white ink. Izuku hoisted them effortlessly, slinging 2 over his shoulders and carrying the 3rd in his left hand. Just then, Kaminari and Shinso stepped down from the airship terminal ramp. Kaminari blinked. "Whoa, you got our stuff already? What, they didn't hassle you for extra, did they?" Izuku shook his head. "They didn't." Kaminari scoffed. "Well, good. If they had, I would have zapped their ugly buttes back into the bunks they crawled out of." Shinso sighed behind him, very diplomatic. Kaminari grinned. "I'm the embodiment of diplomacy." Izuku offered a faint smile. It seemed that whatever was between them had gotten resolved. His hands still shook faintly at his sides, heart aching, but for now, he let himself stand in the moment. Let himself walk forward. Even with ghosts stitched into the seams of his being. The office of Mayor Danjuro Tobito had changed significantly from how Kaminari had remembered it from last time. Gaudy velvet drapes. Velvet furniture. Velvet wallpaper. Somehow, even the filing cabinet looked like it had been upholstered in velvet bright burgundy and not doing any favors to anyone's retinas. Kaminari sat cross-legged in a plush chair that seemed to swallow half his torso, chewing enthusiastically on a crepe that had been offered by the mayor's assistant as a local delicacy. He was on his 3rd. Across the broad desk, Shinso sat with his arms folded and brow furrowed, back straight like a plank of grim focus. The glowing enchantment lamp on the ceiling bathed the room in a warm, golden hue shimmering across the thin spectacles that Mayor Danjuro adjusted as he spoke. Meanwhile, Izuku stood quietly in the hallway just outside, staring up at one of the enormous oil paintings that flanked the outer corridor. His head tilted slightly to the right. His eyes narrowed, then relaxed, then narrowed again. The painting a grotesque attempt at some grand battle scene, featuring a man with 12 fingers per hand jousting what appeared to be a giant duck seemed to leer back. Definitely cursed, Izuku mumbled to himself, then reconsidered. It's bad taste. Possibly both. Inside the office, Shinso sighed as he pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. "So let me get this straight. The demon was last sighted around the river outskirts, but according to what your townsfolk say, she and her partner have already passed beyond the southern perimeter." Danjuro nodded, fingers steepled. Yes. The peculiar appearance of the demon made her easy to track pink skin horns. "Yup, that's our girl," Kaminari muttered, liking his fingers. She and the red-haired fellow were seen walking straight toward the wastes. "Didn't even try to cover their trail," Danjuro added, somewhat impressed, "though I can't imagine they'd survive it long." Yes they can." Shinsu's face darkened at that. "They're not ordinary." He rose from his seat and paced a few steps before stopping at the edge of the desk, hand on his chin. "If they've entered the corrupted zone, then there's no point in following them through. We both know sending a team in would be suicide." Kaminari finally sat upright, stretching his arms behind his head, which leaves us with one logical bet to Goba. It's the only accessible city outside the corrupted belt. Shinso nodded slowly. "They'll either resurface there, or circle back to Lab Brava. We should split coverage." I'll have to update Aizawa, he added, his voice growing more clipped. Request reinforcements to keep watch here in case they double back. Danjuro smiled kindly from behind his desk. You are welcome to stay as long as you wish, of course. It's the least we can do. The gentle river is clear now, and the townsfolk can enjoy the spring festival without fear. Commerce has picked back up too. Shinso gave a polite nod. We appreciate that. Kaminari gave a sharp exhale through his nose, barely suppressing a laugh. Yeah, we fixed the problem all right, he muttered under his breath. And we're still hauling the DMN problem around with us. Shinso shot him a look. Hey, Kaminari held up his hands defensively. I didn't say I mind. Outside the room, Izuku had begun staring at a second painting, this one depicting a nobleman triumphantly holding what appeared to be an omelet over a fallen dragon. He furrowed his brows deeper. The office doors opened with a mechanical creak as Kaminari stepped out first, brushing crumbs off his shirt. All right, bud. Let's go before you start writing a thesis on cursed artwork. He hooked an arm around Izuku's neck, firm enough to drag him gently along like a disgruntled younger brother. Izuku, eyes still locked on the questionable portrait, let out a long sigh. I'm serious, he said deadpan. These paintings are hexed. They're just ugly, dude, Kaminari grinned. That's not the same thing. Feels like it should be. Yeah, well, save your ancient art critiques for someone who's not starving. As they walked down the hallway, Izuku glanced once more over his shoulder, suspicious. The duck-jousting knight seemed to be watching him. Probably. From behind, Shinso stepped out of the office and paused, arms crossed. He watched Kaminari with a quiet, unreadable expression as the blonde teased Izuku on their way toward the elevator lift. He sighed upon thinking what was to come next and then followed. The sky above Dagoba was a dim yellow-gray, smog clinging to the spires like cobwebs spun from soot. The city streets, though bustling, held a tension that was nearly tangible, shoulders hunched, eyes sharp with suspicion. Every clang of metal echoed off brick and stone like a warning bell. Into this, Kirishima burst in like a wildfire. His boots pounded the cracked cobblestones of the southern plaza, his arms wrapped tight around the limp form of Mina, slung on his back like a lifeless body. Her hood had fallen back, revealing dusky pink skin gone pale with corruption, gray veiny patterns sloshed across her skin. Her breathing was shallow wheezing, really. Mina, hey, stay with me, okay? Just a little longer, Kirishima muttered breathlessly. His voice cracked with panic, with guilt. I'm getting you help, I promise. People turned at the commotion, but none stepped forward. Their gazes were sharp, not concerned, curious at best, hostile at worst. Kirishima's gaze landed on a middle-aged man in a gray blazer. He sprinted toward him. Hey, he exclaimed. Where's the nearest hospital? The man blinked, then his eyes narrowed, taking in Mina's curled horns beneath the hood, her unnatural hue, the faint glint of Kirishima's own slit pupils. He didn't answer. Kirishima was shaking. Not from exhaustion, though he was close to collapsing, but from the heat building in his chest, in his blood. His panic frayed into frustration. He took one long stride and grabbed the man by the collar, lifting him half a foot off the ground. I said, where's the nearest hospital? The crowd that had been watching from a distance now stopped completely. A few drew back. Someone gasped. A child clutched their parent's hand. The man struggled in his grip, then finally, eyes wide with fear, rasped out, "A north sector. 2 blocks east, past the old clock tower. Next to the rail line, there's a clinic. Have mercy." Kirishima dropped him like a sack of grain, nearly snarling. His wings erupted from his back, cracking into place with the sound of tearing leather. The crowd flinched. No more time. No more patience. He knelt, adjusted Mina carefully across his back. She whimpered faintly, but didn't wake, and whispered, voice breaking, "You're gonna be okay. Just hang on. Please, hang on." With a beat of his wings, Kirishima soared into the sky, leaving dust and gasps in his wake. The people below stared up in horror and disgust, some shielding their eyes, others muttering curses under their breath. A woman near the back spat on the ground. "Monsters," she hissed. "They always bring ruin with them." The first thing Mina noticed was the sound of boots against tile. Kirishima's heavy, hurried, and uneven, like his balance was off, like something was wrong. Something was wrong. The world around her spun slowly, like a top beginning to lose momentum. She could feel her head bob with every jarring step, but her limbs wouldn't move. They hadn't been moving for a while now. It was all heat. Heat in her veins. Heat behind her eyes. Like fire had seeped into her bones and refused to leave. A faint whimper left her lips before she could stop it. Hey, I've got you, Kirishima's voice came, strained and hushed. Just stay awake a little longer, okay? Mina's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She wanted to tease him. Call him an idiot. Say he was running too fast for her comfort. But all she could do was drift in and out, clutching to the sound of his voice like a lifeline. What was going on? Kirishima shouldered the heavy doors to the Dagoba Regional Clinic with a crash. The stark white lighting made his eyes sting, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not with her slumped so motionless on his back. Not with her body so hot it felt like his skin would burn. Emergency, he called out, desperation slicing through his voice like a knife. Mana poisoning, she's not breathing right. There were 2 nurses behind the desk and 1 older man in a physician's coat standing by a shelf of medicine. They all looked up at once but no one moved. Kirishima stared. They were staring back at him. At her skin, at the twist of her curled horns. He could read it plain as day in their faces. Disgust. Suspicion. Hesitation. Don't just stand there, he barked, his voice cracking. Do something. Still nothing. Something cold began to coil in his gut. The doctor, a gaunt man with thinning white hair and sunken eyes, finally stepped forward, slow and measured like he was being forced to, set her down in that room. He gestured vaguely to the door on the right. Kirishima didn't thank him. Didn't speak. Just nodded, gently shifting Mina's limp body into his arms again and walking her into the room. It was small. Too small. The bed looked like it hadn't been used in weeks, and there was a faint chemical tang in the air that made Kirishima's nose wrinkle. Still, he laid her down with care, brushing aside sweat-damp curls from her face. Mina, he whispered. We're here now. Just hang in, all right? Her eyes opened for a second. Barely. AG, she mumbled. A dry, cracked whisper. Didn't I say I just needed a nap? Kirishima let out a broken chuckle. Yeah, you did, he said softly. Downplayed it as always. She gave him the faintest smile before her eyes rolled back and her body twitched. Sheet. The doctor had entered by now, gloves on, face unreadable. He walked toward them slowly as if he were measuring something. Kirishima didn't like the way he was looking at Mina. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it wasn't the way a doctor should look at a patient. Still, Kirishima stepped aside, just far enough to let him work, not farther. She's half demon. We just came through mana-corrupted territory. She's been exposed too long. You have to flush the corruption. I can see that, Sheil. Need an anti-corruption injection. The doctor cut in curt. He examined her for no more than a few seconds. Checked her pulse. Looked into her eyes with a light. Then turned and opened a case of glowing syringes from the wall. Kirishima watched him pick a vial glowing a weird murky orange. He loaded the said syringe, walking over. Found a vein in Mina's arm and injected it without a word. Kirishima felt his heart stutter. At first, Mina didn't react. Then she arched off the bed with a scream that nearly split Kirishima in two. It burns, AG, it burns. Make it stop. Make it stop. Make it stop. Kirishima lunged for her. Mina. I'm here, hey, Mina. She was thrashing. Clawing at her throat like something was inside her trying to get out. Her nails dragged deep lines down her neck. Her mouth foamed. Her eyes were wide with pain terror. Kirishima grabbed her wrist to stop her from hurting herself. Mina, hey, what should I? But she wasn't seeing him anymore. Then, just like that, her body stilled. Eyes rolled back. Chest still. Mina, he whispered. No answer. Mina. His hand shook. He pressed his ear to her chest. There was a pulse. Faint. Too faint. Behind him, the doctor chuckled. Kirishima turned slowly, Like every inch of his body had to be convinced. The doctor was still holding the empty syringe, looking at him with a satisfied grin. She was an abomination, he said calmly. At least now she looks the part. This city has enough vermin without your kind adding to it. Kirishima stood there, staring. His jaw clenched, breath shallow. The room grew hotter. Poisoned her, he said. Quiet. The doctor didn't flinch. You people are all the same. You come here, infect our streets, threaten our children murder. Kirishima's fingers twitched. His nails dug into the side of the cot. His shoulders shook. You hurt her, he repeated, quieter, warning. There was a long pause. Then a low, guttural growl curled from his throat. The doctor stepped back, just once. He looked uncertain now. Kirishima's body began to shift. Muscles bulged under his coat. His back rippled, something moving beneath the skin. Wings tore out in one sudden, furious movement, snapping wide with the sound of thunder. His eyes burned gold. You tried to kill her. A line of fire cracked along the wall behind him as the air warped and hissed. Then the dragon roared. And the city would never be the same again. The world felt oddly still by the gentle river. The sun hung low in the sky, istarnji gold over the calm, clear water. The faint scent of spring moss drifted up from the riverbanks, and far-off laughter echoed from some children playing in it, splashing the river water onto one another. The air carried the sound gently, like nothing urgent could ever happen here. Izuku stood at the very edge of a small, cracked wooden dock, fishing rod in hand. The line trailed lazily into the water, motionless. He wasn't really fishing for anything. It was about the rhythm. Breathe. Behind him, Shinso sat on a bench that probably hadn't been cleaned since the last month, tapping his foot with unusual nervous energy. His eyes kept flicking to Izuku, then darting away just as fast, like he was trying not to be caught staring at the sun. It was uncomfortable, and kind of awe-inducing. That man raised the Shuto Todoroki. Shinso didn't exactly do idolization, but ever since reading that biography when he was a kid, and since connecting the dots, it was like Izuku had shifted in the air around him, less the suicidal cursed immortal student and more like a suicidal war general in disguise. It was surreal. He leaned forward slightly. So, Shinso began, dragging out the syllable like he was towing the edge of a dangerous cliff. Izuku didn't turn. Just adjusted the rod slightly. I heard you were great in battle, sir. He winced at himself as soon as the word left his mouth. Sir? Really? Izuku slowly turned his head, one eyebrow raised. Sir? Don't read too much into it. Shinso waved a hand. I'm just saying you must have done some great things. Big, impressive, monster-slaying things. Thought maybe you'd show me sometime. Izuku stared in confusion. You want a demonstration? Well, yeah. Now. Not necessarily now, but if you want to then yeah. Izuku stared harder. Okay, fine. I mean, I just thought it'd be cool. You know, you're kind of a legend, Shinso muttered, adjusting his cloak like it might hide the awkward twist of his shoulders. You raised show, I mean, you've seen battle. Izuku narrowed his eyes slightly. There was a flicker in his expression too quick to catch. But then he looked at the river again and deadpanned, well, I'm currently fighting the fish. So unless you want to throw yourself in and assist the enemy, I'm kind of busy. Shinso slouched back on the bench, groaning. Oh, come on. Just this once? You're weird today, Izuku murmured. Before Shinso could plead further, they heard uneven footsteps approaching, quick, heavy, and desperate. Kaminari skidded into view like he'd just run a marathon. His coat was half slipping off his shoulder, one of his gloves clutched in his hand, and his hair, usually chaotic, looked like he'd been electrocuted by accident this time. Shinso, Izuku, we have to move. Shinso stood up immediately, his posture snapping to attention. What happened? Kaminari gulped in a breath. We got orders. Just now. Direct from Aizawa. We're being relocated to Dagoba. Emergency Class A alert. Izuku turned slightly, hand lowering from his rod. Why? Kaminari wiped his brow. Because there's a dragon. Izuku froze. Shinso blinked. I'm sorry, a what? AFING dragon, Shinso. Kaminari half yelled. Flames, wings, tail, the whole medieval package. It's torching half of Dagoba. There's already been structural collapse, mana surges, unconfirmed casualties. This is very real, and it's bad. Shinso stared at him like he was speaking another language. Dragons are extinct. Have been for centuries. If not completely mythical. Maybe it's an illusion. Kaminari snapped. Does an illusion level buildings? Does an illusion breathe fire the size of a goddamn house? Aizawa said the whole city's in flames and they don't have enough mage combatants nearby. He told us to relocate now and try to control the rampage before the entire city is gone. Izuku went silent. His eyes weren't on either of them. They were locked on the treeline, brows drawn slightly, lips parted just a fraction as if tasting the air. Whatever it is, Aizawa wants us there. Now, Kaminari pressed. We're the closest qualified team. Why not send heavy units? Shinso muttered. This is well beyond. Because, Kaminari cut in, lowering his voice, most mage units can't get there in time. The corrupted lands block teleportation unless you have point-marked coordinates, and air travels too slow. Aizawa's sending others, but we're the first response. We're not going there to kill it but to stop the destruction until backup arrives. Shinso muttered something under his breath that sounded a lot like, we're gonna die. Izuku exhaled slowly. The tension in his shoulders shifted. His gaze returned to them, and for the first time, his expression looked certain. I can help, he said. Kaminari whirled to him. You're immortal, not fireproof. Sure you can regenerate and all, but how will you calm it down, better yet subdue it? I've dealt with dragons before, Izuku said quietly. Shinso snapped his head toward him. Excuse me? Really? Once, Izuku added, backing away wondering why the purple head was being the way he was, a long time ago. That's not the kind of sentence you drop casually, Kaminari whispered, gripping his bag. Izuku shrugged and smiled. It was a good dragon. This one might be different, but I think I know how to calm it or kill it if that fails. Kaminari and Shinso exchanged a glance. There was something unsaid in Izuku's tone. Something that made Kaminari frown and made Shinso feel like the world just tilted slightly off balance. You're sure? Shinso asked. I am. The pause. Then Kaminari nodded once, tugging 3 scrolls from his pouch. Aizawa sent these. Point marked for Dagoba's eastern perimeter. He tossed one to Shinso, one to Izuku. Charge them, Izuku, yours already activated, he said. Wandu. They all pressed their fingers to the glyphs. 3. The scrolls lit with violet light. And the gentle river vanished as they reappeared in a rush of displaced air and heat. The scent of burning stone and metal slammed into their lungs. Dagoba was on fire. Buildings were crumbling. Smoke spiraled high into the sky. People were running for their lives, their screams swallowed by the monstrous roar tearing through the air. A massive, winged creature towered in the center of the chaos, crimson-scaled and fire-wreathed, eyes glowing with fury. The dragon. Shinsu's voice failed. Kaminari's eyes bulged. And Izuku took one slow step forward, his heart slamming once against his ribs. His voice was just a whisper, Kirishima. Flames crackled and danced over rooftops, hungrily consuming brick and wood. Black smoke billowed in clouds, swallowing the sky. The roar of the dragon Kirishima shook the very bones of the earth beneath their feet, deep and furious and in pain. Kaminari's eyes were wide, darting from blaze to blaze. His breath came short, rattled in his chest. Sweat lined his forehead not from heat, but from the fear twisting in his gut. He turned sharply to Izuku, still winded from the teleportation. Okay, genius. So what's the plan now? But Izuku wasn't listening. The immortal stared ahead with an expression they'd never quite seen on him. Excitement. A crooked, wild grin curled his lips. He didn't answer. He ran. Straight into the fire. Like it welcomed him home. Kaminari's instincts kicked in. Wait, Izuku. He bolted forward after him, panic overriding reason, footsteps crunching over smoldering debris only to be yanked back roughly by the collar of his coat. What the hell are you doing? Shinso snapped, dragging Kaminari backward with more strength than he usually let on. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" "Let go!" Kaminari shouted, twisting, shoving at Shinsu's hands. "He's going in alone." Shinsu's grip didn't budge. "And if you go in, what then? You'll die in 5 minutes tops." Kaminari shoved his hands against Shinsu's grip. "Izuku's in there." "He's immortal," Shinso barked back, eyes wild. "You're not." Kaminari's breaths came in sharp pulls. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Shinso stared at him, heart pounding, knowing where this was going before it even reached Kaminari's lips. "We can't just stand here," Kaminari hissed. "What the hell are we supposed to do then?" "Watch." His voice cracked at the edge, frustration, helplessness, grief that had never healed properly. Shinso was silent for a beat. He glanced toward the city, its silhouette distorted by smoke and flame, the flashes of the dragon's rampage flaring like lightning in a storm cloud. He exhaled through his nose and stepped forward, resting both hands firmly on Kaminari's shoulders. Kaminari jerked his head toward him, his mouth tight with fury, with pleading. Shinso met his eyes. Calm, steady. The most grounded he'd been in the last 20 minutes. "Denki, Izuku is not her," he said quietly. Kaminari went still. "W." Shinso kept his gaze locked. "He's not Jaya, don't confuse them." Kaminari flinched. It was almost imperceptible, a twitch in his jaw, a slow blink, but it cracked something open in him. "Don't," Kaminari whispered, his voice shaking. Shinso stepped closer. "I know you're worried about him. So am I." A long pause passed between them. "Izuku told us to trust him," he reminded. "He'll be coming out of there soon enough, trust me. He has a plan. Or something close to it." Kaminari looked up, eyes glassy. "And if he doesn't?" Shinso exhaled, unsure. "We'll cross that bridge when we come across it." They both stood in the glow of the burning city. And this time, Kaminari didn't try to run in. He stood, fists clenched, beside Shinso. Waiting. Hoping. The fire curled like living things snaking along stone, cracking through steel, and devouring timbered roofs with a relentless roar. The city of Dagoba was burning. Not just buildings. Streets. History. And in the center of it all, a dragon. Towering, scarlet-scaled and maddened, screaming fire into the wind like it could drown out the world. Izuku ran straight into it. His coat was already singed. One sleeve half-burnt, sticking to his skin. The soles of his boots blistered against the scorched ground. But his eyes, green and sharp, were locked ahead. On the chaos. On the thing at its center. On him. "Kirishima," he murmured, breath catching in his throat. He ducked under falling debris, leapt over collapsed scaffolding, a second too late to avoid a burst of flame that seared across his back. He stumbled, hissed out a curse, and kept going. As he neared, the heat grew, unbearable waves of it radiating from Kirishima's body, the sheer mana output enough to make the air itself shimmer. Izuku called out, "Aichuru." The dragon turned, its eyes wild and unfocused, and swung a massive foreleg. It hit him like a freight train. The world spun. Bones snapped, he felt his ribs crack inward like a collapsing ceiling. He hit the pavement with a wet crunch, skidding across it like a discarded rag doll. Somewhere behind him, part of a building collapsed in on itself from the impact. "That-ow!" Izuku groaned, blood bubbling from the corner of his mouth. He pushed himself up, breath shallow, pain knifing through his chest with every inhale. "Knew that'd happen," he coughed, dragging himself upright. His arm hung limp at his side, dislocated again. Some reunion. Kirishima roared, flames liking the edge of his jaws, and charged again. Izuku didn't move this time. He let the tail slam into him, sharp and plated and faster than anything that size should be. He was flung across the square, crashed into a stone archway, and fell in a crumpled heap at its base. "2 for 2, he wheezed and laughed. It was a ragged, broken sound. But he stood. One step, then another. His leg twisted unnaturally, mending mid-stride with wet cracks and pops. His skin peeled and reformed under the heat. He limped toward the burning center of the square, toward the dragon. He didn't shout this time. Instead, he scaled the base of a ruined clock tower. The structure groaned under the weight of age and flame, but held. From the top, Izuku sprinted across a half-melted walkway, slipped, caught himself and leapt. His boots landed hard on thick crimson scales. Kirishima snarled, twisting, trying to throw him off. But Izuku crawled forward, fingers digging in between ridges, until he reached the base of his horns. "Easy now," he muttered, clinging tight. His voice was hoarse, smoke-drenched, but steady. "Is it me, or am I having a sense of déjà vu, are you?" Kirishima thrashed. "I visited the mountains," Izuku said through grit teeth, "like Katsuki told me to." The dragon bucked. Izuku held tight. After Shudo, a breathless pause. "I felt like it was the end of everything. I really wanted all of this to end, not that my thoughts have changed." The flick. His grip slipped. And guess what? He was flung into the air. He twisted mid-fall, slamming back down onto Kirishima's shoulder with a crunch of bone and scale. A fresh wave of fire licked his side, cooking flesh. He coughed blood. It dripped from his lip, down his chin, sizzling on hot scale. "I got trapped, the weather had changed, man. Snowstorms and all that shit, climate change, you know," he said, laughing between gasps. 8 centuries. Frozen. I didn't even try to leave before becoming an icicle. Kirishima hesitated. Woke up in a river. Got stabbed by a weird tentacle monster for a week straight. Honestly? I thought I deserved it. Izuku grinned, teeth red. "Hey Kirishima. I kinda missed this. Though I bet Katsuki would be turning in his grave right about now." The dragon's roars faltered. Izuku slid down his spine, landing hard at the base of his neck. "I got electrocuted too," he added casually. "That was new." Kirishima stilled. A few long seconds passed, the fire flickering lower. Then slowly the beast beneath Izuku shifted. The scales drew inward, bones cracking and twisting back into human shape. Wings folded. Horns shrank. The roar quieted. And when it was done, Kirishima fell to his knees, smoke curling around his shoulders. He was trembling. "Izuku," he rasped, voice barely audible over the crackling ruin around them. Izuku was already there, steadying him. His hands were blackened and bloodied. His face was a mess. But his eyes were gentle. "I'm here," he whispered. Kirishima collapsed against him, burying his face into Izuku's shoulder. Then he jolted up. "Mina!" His voice cracked with panic. "Izuku, she's still she." Hey, Izuku said quickly, gripping his arm. "Slow down." Kirishima's eyes were glassy, frantic. "She's corrupted. Mana bad. I don't know what the doctor injected into her." She screamed and then she just collapsed. He clenched his fists, shaking. "I didn't know what else to do." There was desperation in his voice. Not just panic. Guilt. Pleading. Like a student reaching out to a mentor, a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. Izuku nodded, already rising. "Take me to her," he said. Kirishima didn't wait. He shifted again, wings bursting from his back, and held out his arm. Izuku climbed on without hesitation. And together, they flew back through the smoke, toward whatever hope they could salvage. The scorched earth still hissed with the remnants of flame. The blackened skyline of Dagoba shimmered under the setting sun, smoke curling lazily upward as though the city itself were exhaling after a nightmare. Kaminari paced like a man possessed. Back and forth, hands on his hips one moment, yanking at his hair the next, muttering under his breath like it'd keep the world from falling apart. "He's been gone too long, I should have gone in. What if he got eaten? What if he's soup now?" Shinso, still as a statue at the edge of the field, stared silently at the charred horizon. The smoke caught the last light of day, casting him in muted grays. His eyes, though calm, were scanning, waiting. "He's not soup, he'd regenerate in the dragon's stomach, probably," Shinso said dryly. Kaminari spun toward him. "How do you know?" "He jumped into the fire, Shinso." "Fire? Dragon-level fire. I know he's immortal, but does that even work against being baked like a pastry?" There was a beat. Then off in the sky something moved. A gust hit them a moment later, kicking up ash and soot, and Kaminari raised an arm to shield his eyes. What the? The figure was flying gliding with heavy, uneven, awkward wing beats. A red-winged humanoid form crested into view, the glow of scales still simmering under cooling flesh. Kirishima. A shape cradled in his arms. Another figure clung to his back like a particularly unbothered barnacle. Kaminari squinted. No freaking way. That he did not, Shinso murmured, voice flat with disbelief. Kaminari blinked. I'm not high, right? Not unless you laced your rations again. I didn't. Then no. You're not high. Kirishima landed with a thud that cracked the scorched earth beneath his claws, wings folding down, sweat glistening on his forehead. His breathing was heavy, but his grip on Mina, limp and unconscious in his arms, was careful, desperate. And dangling awkwardly from his back was Izuku, legs swinging a little as he dropped unceremoniously to the ground and landed with a soft grunt. He stood, brushing off soot and ash from his coat, hair windswept and singed, his face mostly unreadable save for a crooked smile playing on his lips. Hey, he said casually, this is Kirishima, my dragon friend. Like saying, hey, meet my cat Frankie the Sixth. He gestured behind him at the enormous red-scaled hybrid still panting on the ground. Oh, Izuku added, pointing toward the unconscious form in Kirishima's arms, and she needs urgent medical care. Might want to move fast. Kaminari blinked. Shinso blinked slower. You have a dragon friend, Kaminari said, voice caught somewhere between a laugh and a scream. Of course you have a dragon friend, of course you do. Shinso took a cautious step forward, eyes flicking to Mina's pale face. He turned to Izuku with something like awe. That was remarkable, sir. Truly. His tone was formal, stiff, with the kind of reverence one might reserve for a ghost or a statue come to life. Izuku made a face. You can stop it with the sir. What is with that anyway? Behind them, Kirishima let out a low growl, not threatening, but urgent. They all turned at once. Kirishima's voice was strained, worried. She needs help. Now. Kaminari's posture straightened immediately. Right? Right. He gave Kirishima a weak, apologetic smile. Sorry, man. The former already pulling out a vial of stabilizing mana from his pack, he poured some onto her neck, from where the vein pattern had started showing as it glowed and enveloped the Pinkette's body. Her expression visibly relaxed as her body regained some color. For a brief moment, no one spoke. And then Kaminari muttered under his breath, voice too stunned to be annoyed, I swear to God, I blink for 5 minutes and this guy tames a dragon. Shinso just smiled proudly as if he was the one Kaminari was talking about. And in the growing dark, the four of them gathered around to watch over the fragile heartbeat grasping for dear life.